All right. I hope everyone's doing well. Um, I actually wanted to do this space because I thought I might have actually caught COVID. um, I've had to travel through some airports recently, and traveled back from Charlottesville, of course, where I was on trial in a lawsuit. Had a bit of a mixed outcome, but anyway. I then went on this kind of family Thanksgiving vacation, which is great, but that's a lot of traveling. And then when I got back, I was just really sick and I had a lot of the COVID symptoms. But I took a test and I do not have COVID. So I guess that means that COVID is fake. No, just kidding. Um, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of like symbolism of COVID and how that's inflected through polarization. I was just had this idea spinning in my head for a little bit, thought it was perfect idea for space, and then we can talk about whatever you guys want later on. But all right, let me just start in on this, and if you guys want to speak about, let's keep it on topic at least at the beginning. And if you guys want to speak about something related to this matter, you can just ask to speak. But okay, so I think every 4 or 7 years, there's always some big trauma that occurs that informs everything going forward. And so, an obvious example of this is 9/11. And the Iraq War was kind of part of that. Every headline you read in a paper, because we kind of still were reading papers then, or anything you saw on a blog was ultimately about 9/11. Even if you had to read down a few paragraphs, it was ultimately derived from 9/11. It was ultimately about the Iraq War. It was ultimately about America's place in the world and geopolitics, etc. Now, that came back a little bit with the Afghanistan thing, but all of those questions are now tabled. We just don't bother with them in a way. Uh, Around 2008, 9/11 and the Iraq War became an afterthought, and it was all about the economic crash. Everyone was reading the Financial Times and talking about the stock market and the elite and Bernie Madoff and blah blah blah. Everything was ultimately about that. And then Trump came along. So we're good. We seem to have these like 7 year cycles, maybe 5 to 7. And, since 2015, every headline you've read is about Trump. And even if it's not really about Trump, it's kind of related to Trump in some way. I mean, you couldn't cover a local dog show and not kind of relate it back to Trump's latest outrage. He has infected just informed our minds to this degree. It is incredible. That includes myself, obviously. Um, so we got a good 5 years out of Trump, and he's still not done, of course. But obviously, COVID has been that level of trauma, just earth shattering trauma that changes how we think, reveals certain things about us, and might even kind of, yeah, I think kind of changes consciousness in a way. Maybe reveals something, but also changes it. And so I was just kind of interested to talk about this. I'm not really, this isn't really about like the latest take on the Omega variant, or sorry, it's not the Omega, it's the lowercase Omega variant. It's not about anything like that. It's not about should we mask kids or whatever. I don't want to, I want to talk, I want to kind of abstract from that and talk about this almost like on a symbolic level. Okay, so a background for talking about anything that occurs is polarization. And, I think a lot of people in the dissident sphere, white nationalists, they'll say things like, America's divided by race. Even liberals will say this and so on. Well, okay, I think that's obviously true on a certain level, but if polls are to be believed, we are far more divided by political party. We are hyper polarized. And I think that polarization reveals really strong psychological and class differences. And so, whereas, 50 or 60 years ago, we would have movies like Look Who's Coming to Dinner, where, gasp, our young daughter has brought back a black boyfriend. This is the edgiest, most controversial thing you can imagine. Well, if they were to remake that film, it would be about like my daughter is my the liberal parents and their daughter brings back like a MAGA dude, or vice versa, like a kind of hillbilly parents and his son is dating a a liberal girl or something. That we are far more polarized in that way. So if you look at polling now, obviously we should treat any poll with a certain degree of skepticism regarding its accuracy, regarding what people are willing to report to pollsters. Of course we should, but putting that aside, people are far more concerned about their children dating a Democrat or a Republican than they are about them dating someone of another race. This is just maybe this isn't true. You want to disagree with it, but that's how they report it. Far more concerned. And that whole idea of civil war is in the air, and it's kind of in the air everywhere. You could probably scratch a liberal and hear a civil war story about how we should separate and just allow the red states to wither and die, and our cosmopolitan blue states will thrive. And again, are conservatives actually willing to undergo a bloody campaign of secession? No, they're clearly not. But do they talk about it? Is it part of their imagination, et cetera? It clearly is. And that's interesting. You don't just hate the other side, excuse me, you don't just disagree with the other side, and you aren't willing to change parties every election or so. There is no longer churn. You now are a Democrat or Republican, and it's not just like, I like this guy, I want to have a beer with this guy, I like this policy, he's the right guy at this moment, or something like that. As Americans voted in the past, that is how they voted. They would split their ticket, change parties, blah blah blah. They don't do that anymore, and it's because right and left aren't just political ideologies. I think the ideologies are kind of irrelevant. It is a class difference and a kind of psychological difference that I don't think we can underestimate. And it's not just a racial difference. The split is between the white race pretty profoundly. There are deep psychological differences between a liberal managerial elite who might have formerly voted Republican, by the way, now are clearly voting Democrat, and a working middle class or working class, or to be frank, kind of underclass white person who's voting for the GOP religiously. And these are huge differences that go beyond race. And I think they go beyond race to the extent, in the sense that I think actually a lot of from what we see, a lot of Hispanics are actually joining in the GOP. I think they resonate with that much more than they resonate with the Democrats. And what is that about? It's about mentality, you could say. It's also about class. And it is about your kind of state in the pecking order. And are you part of it? Are you a manager, or are you a small business owner or laborer? And that's how we're separating these things. What I've noticed with this polarization, which I guess I summarized fairly briefly, but is very important, is that everything is politicized. So, I'll just use an example that's classic now. Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Very bad film in my opinion, but putting that aside, it is a left film. And it is attempting to kind of undermine a certain nostalgia, undermine a certain mythology, and it immediately went on to the left-right spectrum. Now, in 1977, whether Star Wars or The Empire Strikes Back or whatever, whether those are right-wing or left-wing movies, are pretty it's pretty ambiguous. I'm sure they had fans across the board. You could kind of spin both of those movies in a right-wing or left-wing direction. They both adhere to a certain kind of American mythos about rebels against an empire, et cetera. But What I'm saying is now everything is polarized and it just has to go there. It has to flip. It's a duality. It's either right or left. And when you have a social trauma like COVID, it too is graphed, if that's the right way, if that's the right word, on this left right divide. And it is, you can't, like, people will say, like, oh, we shouldn't politicize public health or whatever. Well, that train left the station a decade ago. I mean, we politicize everything. There is no way we cannot politicize public health in the sense that we politicize movies, food, sports, language. I mean, it's just it's a ridiculous statement to say that. Excuse me. So, what happened when COVID hit is that you had this weird situation where it kind of could have gone either way. So Donald Trump was in office. And as we know, presidents generally benefit from any kind of crisis. There's a kind of rally around the flag effect. Now, that they might not necessarily benefit from like a stock market crash. They'll probably get voted out. But if there's a war or there's some kind of big trauma or natural disaster, the president will likely benefit from that. And the other thing about it is that COVID, it's this almost inherently kind of nationalistic disease in this funny way. I mean, you see like so much symbolism around like immigrants and whatever has always been about kind of a virus. It's like they're bringing, you know, again, to go back to Trump's speech, they're rapists, they're murderers, whatever. They're bringing in these diseases. They're like an infection coming into our bloodstream. And so that metaphor really works and really resonates. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, when we really didn't know a lot about what was going on, the liberals were against Trump doing any travel ban, Trump talking about this, Trump demonizing China or what have you. And so that's how at the very beginning, that's kind of how it shook out. But as things went along, it kind of shook out in other ways. And so Trump was very fearful of the stock market going down because he had this just psychic connection to the line go up, I get reelected, line go down, I get voted out. Now that's not exactly untrue. He's not exactly wrong about that, but putting that aside, he obviously was just obsessed with the stock market. So he was motivated to deny COVID-19. And you also saw this weird thing with conservatives where they would kind of talk themselves into circles. So I heard this actually on the radio. This is before Rush Limbaugh died. And it was at the very early stages of COVID in 2020. And I was just listening to the radio. I wanted to hear what conservatives were saying about this. And on the one hand, they would say that this is nothing. It's the common cold. It's not a big deal. Why are we obsessing about it? Get tough, blah, blah, blah. And then on the other hand, they were saying this might very well be a virus created by Kim Jong-un. And so, it's like either this is not a big deal and you're going to be fine, or this is like an evil death ray created by Dr. Evil. Like it's just, those things do not compute. There was something going on, some kind of schizoid mentality going on with them. And they've kind of maintained this. I saw this among conservatives. Jerry Falwell Jr. said the same line. He was like, oh yeah, I just went into a restaurant without a mask. I'm such a badass. And, but we need to look into who created this death weapon. I mean, it's just totally, I don't know if they think through this to see that they're saying just totally incompatible, ridiculously incompatible things. So the conservatives got on this like weird China virus on the one hand, and it's just the flu bro on the other. And that's what they pursued. And we moved into the stage where COVID it got polarized, as I've said, but it really took on very significant like social symbolism. And so I mean, again, look, I have never been a COVID denier. I have, I'm vaccinated. I support vaccines. I'm probably a COVID cuck from the perspective of maybe even many of you guys listening. That's who I am. That's my rational interpretation of events. So I'm not saying any of this to like deny anything, but I do think it's important to look at the symbolism. And so the conservatives were began to be freaked out by mask, and it was this oppression. What are they going to do next? They're going to lock you up in a gulag. I mean, the overreaction to mask was tremendous. Now, I might even agree with them on masking kindergartners or whatever, but putting that aside, their reaction was just over the top. And then on the other hand, I think the mask kind of took on a certain symbolism that I don't think is. I think the conservatives are maybe onto something. It's not too different than like wearing the hijab. It's a symbol of your moral righteousness. So we developed a certain moral consciousness that I don't think we had before. I mean, 40 to 60,000 people die of the flu every year. Um, Going to work with the flu, that actually is a bit immoral. You might, okay, you're going to get some work done, but you might kill someone's grandma doing that. And I don't think that's something we took seriously. We started to at least contemplate that as a society during COVID, just like the morality of infection. And I think there was a kind of demure, quality of wearing a mask. It's covering, and you're covering your face. You're demonstrating a certain kind of obedience and subservience. You are all kind of on the same team, you could say, like we're all in this together. That was one of the messages, but it's a particular kind of we're all in this together. It's a I'm going to cover myself, make myself a little more demure in order to signal my kind of heightened awareness and morality. And that really took on with liberals, where you see liberals wearing a mask while they're walking outside alone. But and when you see something like that that's irrational, you have to say, okay, well, there's a symbolic logic to it. They're symbolizing something to you. The other big thing that we've had, and again, I just to add one little footnote on this, I don't think masks are going away actually, and I think we might see them increasingly, not just in blue states, but I think in kind of upper level or luxury environments. So, for instance, when I was in Charlottesville for the trial, I was in Northern Virginia for a little bit. I actually did some Christmas shopping at the Tyson's Galleria, which is a luxury mall. Plenty of stuff there I couldn't possibly afford. Some of it I could, but everyone operating, like the Ralph Lauren store or the Coach store or whatever, was wearing a mask, and they have sanitizer for you. If you go into your gas station, you know, in Wyoming or whatever, no one's wearing a mask, right? So there's a kind of like upper crust elite, luxurious kind of heightened awareness that I think the mask is demonstrating. And in that sense, I don't think it actually will go away. The other aspect of this is the vaccine. So again, I've been vaxxed. I think vaccines are good. I think the anti-vax sentiment is a totally weird, marginal mentality that there was actually probably more on the left than it was on the right up until today. But again, you can't solve a social health crisis. America doesn't actually work. Everything is going to be politicized. And so we now have huge amounts of conservatives, adopting an anti-vax mentality, whereas 5 years ago, they wouldn't even contemplate that. They didn't think twice when their school, public or private, effectively had a vax mandate on their children because it's for the measles and rubella and chickenpox and so on. They're like, oh yeah, of course, you got to get vaxxed. Now it's this thing. It's entered their consciousness. And again, I don't necessarily think this is going to go away, and I think this is going to have long-term effects. And so what is the vaccine for them? It's like an elite demon poison. It's like the elite juice or whatever that's being pumped into you, and you are tainted. And so, in this sense, both the liberals and the conservatives are operating under a kind of poison metaphor, or like a hygiene metaphor, where, with the liberals, it's like, oh, oh my God, the virus is everywhere. Put on a mask right away. Don't touch me. Get out the sanitizer, blah, blah, blah. The conservatives kind of have the same mentality, but it's just a little bit different. It's like, oh my God, if you put this vaccine into my body, I'm going to become infertile, or I'm going to lose my mind, or I'm just going to die. It's this elite, satanic, you know, drop of poison that you're putting in. This is how it operates on a symbolic level. And I don't think I'm overstating the matter. I mean, I could go and easily find conservatives who are literally saying that this is the sperm of Satan or whatever, the vaccine. And so again, both sides are kind of operating under this kind of, hygiene poison metaphor. And I think that's fascinating. And again, I think it's so deep and so symbolic that I don't think this is anything that's going to go away. I think this is going to be with us for a long time. Okay, there you go. There's 20 minutes of thoughts. I'll let some guys in if you want, and we can talk about this more. All right, you guys can just speak up if you've requested. You can speak. You can just speak up if you'd like to. Okay, I'll just. So Bardom, do you want to speak?
Yes, I was like thinking about this like earlier today. I think that that it how do you say, like they're like this sort of like anti-vaxxers. They're like very like ill-informed. Obviously, it is sort of interesting because they are sort of like extremely like sure of themselves when it comes to like because they like to throw around the buzzwords like oh, it's an mRNA vaccine or something like that, and sort of like words like that. And I think it's sort of like interesting because I sort of like have a I'm not a medical student, but I have sort of like read books about medicine and sort of like how viruses work, and I don't feel like comfortable like talking about how exactly the details and the technicalities of vaccinations. But it's sort of like interesting how extremely like arrogant like people on both sides are and have like extremely like strong opinions about this. Despite
also we've all become doctors in the sense. I mean, like,
yes.
For instance, I mean, look, I generally speaking like Joe Rogan. I mean, I think he's kind of the ultimate podcaster in the sense of it's this like, well, crazy conversation. I'm just asking questions, man, kind of thing. But excuse me, as I'm coughing. Again, I actually took a COVID test. I do not have COVID. And also, the good thing to know is that COVID cannot be spread through a Twitter space. I'm going to mute you there. Okay. So it's like Joe Rogan is, free thinker, and like Aaron Rodgers, like, oh, I'm just a free thinker. There's not a one size fits all solution, right? They would never say that about like any other encounter they have with medicine. They would never like read up on heart surgery and inform the doctor that there's not a one size fits all solution. And Joe Rogan, again, he survived a COVID infection. I'm not surprised. I think he would have survived COVID had he done nothing. He's a healthy man. I don't know. I think he's my age, or he's 50 or something like that. He would have survived in all likelihood. But he threw the kitchen sink at it. And so it's like, you don't think that COVID might have long-term effects. I mean, the long-term effects of COVID remain to be seen. I mean, I don't think there's anything conclusive on this. There are some very concerning studies. There are also plenty of examples of people who have it for 5 days and kick it. But like, it's an unknown, it's a novel virus. So he doesn't worry about that. He doesn't worry about medicating himself with ivermectin and all sorts of other things, but he's terrified of taking a vaccine. I mean, that is just totally irrational behavior. And you could say, oh, he's playing to his audience or whatever. Well, okay. I mean, it's gotten serious now. You're not just grifting off conservatives. You're now really affecting your own life and other lives. But I think beyond that, like it's not logical, and it's irrational, and so it's kind of like there has to be some symbolism to it, where he'll throw the kitchen sink at this disease and he will kick it. But then the idea of like taking the elite satanic poison is like something he just could never do. Aaron Rodgers as well. Aaron Rodgers was quite mendacious. He gave a press conference and he said, they said, have you been vaxxed? And he's like, I've been immunized, which means that he's like taken ivermectin. I mean, it was totally mendacious. He knew what he was doing. But he also Aaron Rodgers is a football player. He's also a smart guy. He's kind of more sensitive type. I bet he's listening to Joe Rogan, consuming all this alternative media, making up his own mind. And so we're in this like world where, there's no central authority. There's no real organizing principle. And in fact, we almost have there's almost like an anti-organizing principle. So if Dr. Fauci says something to you, he must be lying. He's out for money, or he's trying to kill you, or he's a satanic pedophile or whatever. But then like the anonymous guy on your Facebook group who's giving you a deal on ivermectin, oh, this guy can be trusted. He's authentic. So we've reached this like deconstruction of the technological society where everyone is managed and conforms, generally speaking, to a kind of 9-to-5 regimen. And we've now entered this new world where there increasingly no order, authority has been flipped on its head, etc. And I think that's a sign of a very stark civilizational decline. Whatever you think about the vax, whatever you think about COVID, go ahead.
Wait. I have one question. So this polarization, you noted that the polarization it's by party, it's not by race. But right. There's like, and you said you speculated that it stems from a psychological difference. But so I have one question, but I have more to say later. But just one question right now. Do you think so? Even though we're polarized by party, do you think in the background the ultimate cause of this irrational, just hysterical polarization where nobody concedes any middle ground, do you think it's ultimately about race, like subconsciously? Because I like the lefties, they're kind of like signaling against the lower class whites, right? Like the stereotypical, racist in a Confederate flag hat. And then I think the rightoids, I think I think they do have like racial dog whistles that they're following. Like, Joe Biden is, he's a liberal, a Democrat, like he's in favor of BLM. So I feel like both sides are kind of like racial conscious too. But do you think the polarization, even though it's by party, do you think it wouldn't be like this if it was a more homogenous country?
I'm not sure. Okay, to answer your last question directly, I'm not sure we would avoid the fate of polarization even if we were a racially homogenous country. So, for instance, I see the same trends in fairly racially homogenous Western countries.
Okay, well, maybe they're like feeding into the American news and conservative media complex, because they're all.
However we get there, we've got there. So I mean, I don't quite know the cause of this, but I do know that it exists. Now, I'm not trying to like dismiss race or say that it's unimportant. Like it clearly plays a major factor in a kind of like anxiety and instability of the American regime, like no question. But again, like I think you have to take these polls seriously on some level and not just say, oh, it's fluff, or they're lying to the pollster. When someone says like I am I can't stand it. I am so concerned about my daughter dating a Democrat. And then they say, well, what would happen if she dated a black person? Well, if he's a Republican.
Well, okay. Well, hold on.
And maybe he's lying to a certain degree, but I don't actually think he's lying. I think that's actually a real thing.
Well, maybe they're not lying. Maybe they kind of see people in their side of the spectrum. They kind of see them as more like racially familiar, and so like also another thing. I feel like this phenomenon is reoccurring in other Western countries that are more homogenous still. Because they're emphasizing with what's happening in America. Because remember, America is
in Austria, it's homogeneous. You have a majority of white people, and they had to platoon the population because of the low rate of vaccination. So it doesn't have to.
Okay, so there's no like phenomenon of like crazy like MAGA aligned people in Austria.
Well. Okay, I agree with you that like MAGA as a phenomenon is remarkably international. So you'll see like Australians wearing MAGA hats and maybe Austrians or sure. But I can't quite pinpoint what the cause is of this. I'm just, and I'm willing to speculate about that and I'm willing to listen to it. But I am saying that the cause isn't exactly just race. There's something deeper going on. Maybe it's even assortative mating on some level, but it's just real deep psychological and class differences are being revealed through political polarization.
Well, this sounds kind of bleak, but go, Pat.
Sorry, my theory about this is that ultimately derives from like the kind of like the evolution. The Enlightenment liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
I think Enlightenment liberalism is not really working anymore in the 21st century. So you have really two approaches how to deal with that. You have the Democrats who are more pragmatistic in their in their approach to going through the future with this, and then you have the Republicans who are more reactionaries, and that's why you get these deranged Republicans who act like the sky's falling down to Democrats because they feel like that they're like betraying this Enlightenment liberalism, whereas the Democrats see it as like the Republicans are like keeping it, are going to actually destroy it because they're not responding well to the future. That's just my theory.
Mm-hmm.
What's really interesting is that it's all bottom up rather than top down. So Donald Trump originally encouraged people to get vaccinated, but then after he went on TV and encouraged people to get vaccinated, but then they were against it. And so he had to change his mind.
Okay, wait. I have one question. Do you think that the Trump fans, do you think they reacted with skepticism about the virus at first because they were afraid it would hurt Trump's re-election chances? Is that what set this kind of polarization?
Trump was afraid of the stock market. That's clear. But I guess what I would suggest is that there was almost like an arbitrary on-off switch that could have gone either way. I mean, one thing that I definitely believe is that if Trump had just embraced COVID, he would have absolutely won re-election. If he had just embraced COVID fascism, let's call it like it is. If he had just said, we're going to lock down, we got to take care of everyone's grandparents, we're going to get these vaccines out, blah, blah. And he did get the vaccine. I mean, he oversaw the vaccines. He would have won re-election, but he just kind of couldn't help himself on two levels. First, it was the stock market. That was kind of like the catalyst. And then it was much deeper than that. And it was his loony base. Like, I'm suggesting that it was almost like an on-off switch where they could have gone either way, because at the very beginning of the pandemic, it was the liberals who were like sounding the alarm about incoming racism. And the liberals were like, we can't give in to xenophobia. You've got to go out and hug a Chinese person today in New York City. Nancy Pelosi did this kind of stuff in San Francisco. And
the base drives Trump and not the other way around.
There is like this thing where, I mean, I have heard like some people say like Trump got the vaccine out and so forth. but I don't think that you can really credit him because because any president would have get the vaccine out fast in this situation.
He thought he
yes.
well,
yes,
he thought the news.
Hang on, Will, hang on. So if Clinton was president, he would have gotten the vaccine out, and if Bush had been president in 2020, he would have gotten out fast. Yes.
Well, okay, yes, but you should give him some credit. That's all I would say.
Okay, well,
he didn't halt the vaccine.
No, you were right that he was scared of the stock market. He was spooked by it, and he thought. I guess the news of a vaccine, of an imminent vaccine, an accelerated development timetable for a vaccine, he thought it would keep the stonks, high.
Yeah.
Because he was worried about re-election, right? Like every 4 years we have a presidential election. So it's just they're chained to the election cycle. They can't plan long term and be rational.
Yes.
So that's like a flaw in bourgeois democracy. I don't mean to sound pretentious, but I have to say it. That's a flaw when you have an electoral system.
That's short term. Yes, they can't engage in long term planning because they're effectively, to use Hoppian language, they're effectively renting out the state as opposed to owning it. And so it's kind of like your hotel. You just rent it out, leave it dirty, throw a party, leave, and you don't own it. Which I think would kind of have a kind of long term effect. There's no doubt that a king, sorry to sound like a neo-reactionary libertarian here, but indulge me for a bit. There's no doubt that a king of a realm would have just shut the borders and be like, all right, guys, we're making our own food for the next 2 years. We're going to be fine. This will end at some point, but we're just not taking any chances, But if you're Trump and you're like, oh, stonks go up, line go up. I need Wall Street behind me. I'm not going to get reelected if the stock market goes down, which is a very strong correlation. Then you just can't make good, sound decisions.
Right, but we do have case studies though. There are still monarchies in the world, right? I don't know. I'm not an expert on these other countries, but either way,
a real monarchy, not just some impotent constitution.
Or you mean just a government, a government of action? But so yeah, I agree that there was a light switch brain. Have you ever seen this meme? I like to share it a lot. It's direction brain meme. It's it's a Voyak with arrows in his head, and it's left, right, left, right. I think so. I actually believe that it was a direction brain phenomenon. I feel like the anti-vaxxing people, I feel like they were partisans for Trump. That's I suspect.
No question. There's no question about it. Now, it does break down racially to a degree. You have a lot of black people who they're kind of prone to conspiracy theories and kind of all sorts of silliness, or they're just not getting the vax due to just laziness, to be honest. But that being aside, the people who are ideologically committed to anti-vaccines are Trump voting conservatives, period, end of statement.
Oh, just a quick question on that. So there's a bunch of people who are basically, I guess they're kind of close to marking it, but they think if we make a big issue out of this, basically appealing to a lot of the right-wing anti-vax stuff, this is going to be positive for us. And what I always try to tell these people is this is totally tied to Trump election fraud stuff, all the other dumb stuff, and people never want to connect it back to just dumb conservatism. They just want to make it out.
What do you think will happen with the new Omicron variant?
Yeah, I think a lot of people want to ride that wave. And for instance, Nick Fuentes is clearly having a lot of success just riding that anti-vax wave to the point that it's not about nationalism or white nationalism or whatever, or immigration or anything. It's just about anti-vax. Right, but whatever. I'm not. Everyone knows my opinion of Nick Fuentes, but I'm not going to deny reality. I mean, I think he's clearly making some waves doing that. It's just the question is like waves towards what? Like what ultimately happened? You're jumping on this like just utter delusional stupidity, and like that doesn't lead anywhere good, in my opinion. You're not like smarter than everyone. You're tricking everyone. You know, it's just you're just goofy at the end of the day. Like there are other like I don't know. Do we want to adopt creationism because that activates whites? You know, it's like all the white conservatives really love creationism. We should make that our cause, or what have you? Chocolate milk comes out of brown cows. I mean, it's all just ultimately stupid.
That's.
Hey,
I was
Richie.
gonna add to that actually, because I was gonna ask a question about that.
Yeah.
You said about how conservatives contradict each other all the time about it's a Kim Jong-un virus to kill all of us, but also it's not a big deal,
Yeah.
so we don't need to worry about the vaccine, all of that. And now you tapped into that as well. I mean, you say it's totally irrational for Nick Fuentes to say this sort of stuff. What are you going to be creationism next? And I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask what you think the implication of this kind of mass takeover of irrationality on both sides, where the science doesn't matter, nothing matters. It just you pick a side and you go with it. Like, what are the implications of that in the long run?
Well, I mean the major implication is the deconstruction of a technological society. So, I mean, I've been very influenced by Jacques Ellul in this regard, and what he wrote about it about. All right, I'm gonna have to mute someone there. There we go. What he wrote about in, I mean, I've muted you guys. You can unmute yourself. Just you're making noise, so I'm muting you. What Jacques Ellul wrote about was, you in forming propaganda, you have to give someone a kind of structure for their life, and that is like you're either on the left or on the right. You're a Democrat or Republican. This is the Overton window of opinion that's possible. You vote on Tuesday. You watch the nightly news at 5 p.m. You play softball on Saturday, and you go to church on Sunday. And once we left a agricultural world and the feudalism and its remnants, we entered a kind of new era of humanity, and we needed to reassert like a schedule, time, authority, and so on. And we did this through things, what he called propaganda in a very broad sense. But in his sense, propaganda isn't just like a war bonds poster. Propaganda is like the nightly news. It's telling you what's important, and it's also telling you what's not important. Like the New York Times famous slogan, all the news that's fit to print. It's like this is your consciousness in the form of 100 pages of printed paper. And you need to do that. I mean, Jacques Ellul reached the conclusion, this isn't just like totalitarian control. Once we've left an agricultural or feudal or post-feudal society, you need to develop these systems of time, structure, authority, etc. And I think where we are now, and I do think we're at kind of an early stage of this, but these things are being deconstructed before our very eyes. And so what exactly that leads to, I don't know. I mean, this is like over the horizon, but I do know that it's like a certain strong signal of civilizational decline. It's not going to lead anywhere good. I mean, at least in the short term. It might lead somewhere good in the long term, in the sense that some other new world is possible. But in the short term, it's going to lead somewhere bad. But it's not, I guess what I would stress to like various right wingers is that it's not just like the liberals have taken over, socialism has won, and communism next, or what. That's nonsense. Where we are right now is a kind of like end stage of technological society.
What do you think is going to happen in 2024?
But it wasn't always like this, though, was it? I mean, it's kind of a new thing. So, what has changed in your opinion that has resulted in people being to this level of just irrationality and not taking into account, the reality of the situation or whatever? Why is it that this is kind of like everybody has their political identity and, truth beyond that doesn't matter? It's just whatever is convenient at this point, that and whatever works for, getting reelected or something.
Well, I mean, I think it's the breakdown of those structures. I mean, it's hard to find a cause. You can look at the phenomenon, but it's hard to like locate a cause. But at the end of the day, like, who watches the nightly news anymore? Old people is the answer to that question, but very few people. At one point, Walter Cronkite could like change public opinion in 30 seconds on the nightly news. That's now impossible. And we're dealing with like this crazy internet phenomenon of social media and fake news and disinformation and just total silliness and hyper reality and all that kind of stuff. There's no like governing there, or at least the governing authority in these societies, the institutions are being undermined and they're losing their authority. And I guess contra a lot of conservatives, I would say that kind of is actually a bad thing, because a lot of conservatives like this. They're like, like, oh, no one wants to listen to some Yale professor anymore. Like, we're just listening to common sense or whatever. Well, that's not how societies function. And listening to common sense sounds to me a lot like, Joe Rogan overdosing on ivermectin. I mean, it's ultimately like there has to be governing structures for every human being in society. And even though there are major class differences and regional and cultural differences, there has to be some sameness. And I think it's interesting to ask, like, what brings America's society together? I mean, I don't know, NFL football? I mean, the Super Bowl, we're all watching the same thing. I mean, maybe that's it. Marvel movies? I mean, it's not a lot. And it's just really kind of on the precipice of a breakdown.
So then your conclusion is that then, basically to avoid a civil war where you have these two different groups of people who believe different things to be true, to avoid that kind of clash and to unite people, the solution is one governing ideology that is irrational or irrational. As long as it's one, that's how we avoid the ultimate
well, there has to be something. And I don't think we can just bring this back. I think we're going to have to see this through. And I can't tell you exactly where it leads, because, history is stranger than fiction, but we are clearly living at the end of a civilization. And I think a very strong comparison could be made towards the end of the Roman Empire. And again, what ultimately replaced it? It was ultimately replaced by a new kind of social and economic structure, feudalism, but is ultimately replaced by a new spiritual structure that did give people answers and gave them a new way of thinking. And I think something like that is bound to happen, maybe not in our lifetimes.
Okay. So people who watch U.S. politics, they think, there's a civil war in the cards. But right. I don't think that's true. I think the two sides of the political
I think
spectrum,
there's just dissolution. Basically.
Yeah, well, maybe like in feudalism, right? You went from the Roman imperial system to feudalism, but it looks like there's one side that's the odd man out. That's their astroturfed. I think that the right wingers, I think they're astroturfed. I don't think they would be as virulent and unhinged if we still had the fairness doctrine in media. Like if you had Walter Cronkite, able to change the narrative in 30 seconds. I feel like the right is astroturf. They're the fake side. They're the ones maintaining polarization. And I remember, I think it was like 10, like it may have been like a year ago. I listened to one of your podcasts and you said, like, don't lean into polarization because polarization upholds the status quo. And that's true. It was like one of your podcasts with Hunter Wallace. This was this was a long time ago, like after the election. But I feel like one side is being astroturfed. Like it's the right wing conservative Inc. Media complex.
Well, that is true. Like, if any one of the social differences that we've seen is that the liberals are the media and conservatives are the alt media. And so it's like the liberals are the New York Times, NBC, the NFL, like, all of that kind of stuff. And then conservatives are kind of like the contradiction to that. And in some ways, a kind of parasitical contradiction in the sense that, like, so much of conservative media is just reacting against the left and just being like, oh, what's the latest outrage? What are the latest lies in the New York Times or whatever? But I get that on some level, but like, you have to admit that that's a position of utter weakness. You are reacting to someone else who is at least attempting to govern, and that is the liberals. The liberals do news, they do reporting and stuff like that. Conservatives do like debunking of liberal narratives or whatever.
So isn't the backlash to that? I mean, you see with the whole Kyle Rittenhouse situation, even the most mainstream of conservatives are praising this guy for what he did and justifying, well, if the police isn't going to do their job, somebody has to, right? I mean, the logical consequence of that is we are the reactionaries. We are fighting against the media with our alt media. And, if the police aren't going to do their job, somebody has to. I mean, don't you see how the logical progression from that could very well lead to a civil war?
No, because
I don't think it could, but I would just simply stress, I don't see a civil war. I see dissolution.
Yeah, okay. Wait, hold on. There's not going to be a civil war over Kyle Rittenhouse shooting Antifa protesters because it's not like something people feel in their.
It doesn't have to. It just has to escalate.
No, okay, yeah, but it can't escalate if it looks like it's a stupid political disagreement between whiteoids. That's not how people feel emotionally in their gut. They're just going to think it's some dumb politics thing because we're polarized.
But that's the thing. People get polarized. Richard was talking about this a little bit ago, right? I mean, it's not really racial even anymore. It's more just you have your own identity and you do anything for your identity, which is the
party.
Hang on here. Let's be honest. Like, who is gonna lay down their lives for sort of like a fat Latino? I mean,
maybe not.
Which white person would do that? I mean, it is not like people who sort of would organize militias and that sort of stuff. I mean, like he's not a very sympathetic figure. I mean, Kyle Rittenhouse. I mean, and the people who follow him are very. They are not like the brightest people, if I put it like that. And
sure, but that's the whole thing. I mean, you have mainstream conservatives. You have Greg Gutfeld saying, "Well, if the police isn't going to do their job, somebody has to." Kyle is
yes, but they're not grifters. I mean, they're the Fox News commentator would never really when push comes to shove, they would never sacrifice their job to defend Kyle Rittenhouse. They do this thing because it's a safe thing to do.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. I want to say one more thing. Politics or partisan politics in America. It's hyper polarizing the society, but it's not a cohesive identity. People aren't actually going to go out and get enraged about it. You saw that girl who got shot at the Capitol. What was her name? Ashley Babbitt. She's like a 30-year-old woman, a mother. But if this was an actual civil war scenario, you would have seen them riot for her, right?
Look, I'm not saying it's going to happen.
No, eventually.
The progression could
structurally, this kind of polarization upholds the status quo. It doesn't launch a civil war because it does
in the short term. So I think you were the one who was quoting something I said where it's like, if you lean into polarization, you are supporting the status quo. I mean, one of the remarkable things about policy and elections is that nothing can get done, and presidential elections at least are kind of predictable once you get a little bit of data in. because you have red states and blue states and a very few swing states. And that was not the case previously. You had like liberal hegemony for some time with the FDR coalition, and then you had these like huge swings where Nixon would just win in a landslide and so on. You'll never see anything like that, at least in the next 10 to 20 years. We're going to have red state, blue state battles because everyone is separated on class and psychology. But I guess what I would say is that in the short term, in the next like decade or maybe 2 decades, this definitely supports state stability. Nothing gets done. We don't have free healthcare. We don't have UBI. We can't do another big war, I don't think. We can't even pass like basic legislation because everyone just hates each other viscerally and so on. All I would say is that at some point, and I think it will happen in my lifetime or our lifetimes, at some point this thing can't work anymore, and there is going to be like serious dissolution.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot like the end of the Ancien regime before the French Revolution, where they can't get anything done. He calls the States General. The States General can't do nothing. It's a lot like also before the end of the Tsar's Russia too. I mean, I think we're kind of in that kind of situation.
Yeah, like I think I've heard other people say this, but like maybe the Republicans are the actual commies because they're the ones that are going full populist and hating the elites and all that. Like they could be, if this actually happens, like we could see like this is a meme, but it's like what is it called? Ron Paul Maoism, where like the libertarians and the auth left people, they align.
Like.
That's not inconceivable.
I don't think we'll see that. Who are like those like leftoid chicks and Alex Jones or whatever? They're gonna start. Nah, I think that's a trend. Amy Therese is gonna.
But I do think it has a point that the sort of like Republican Party is sort of like the party of sort of like disenfranchised and sort of like resentful white people, and it's sort of like the Democrats who are basically the party of the elite. Yeah.
Well, look at like Tucker Carlson or like Jack Posobiec, like making everything about like class, just like this obsession with trying to like de-racialize everything.
Yeah, they might actually like psyop themselves into becoming anti-racist third worldist.
No, I see your point, and Barda, whatever his name is, Bardamu 5. I think he's making a good point. It's like the Republican Party used to be the party of wealth, privilege, and WASP values. It was the upper crust party, and yeah, you'd also have the religious right in there from 1980 on, but that was kind of subdued to some extent, and it was basically the WASP party. Now it kind of is the resentful white party. And someone like Ashley Babbitt is an example of that. I mean, she was I think, Obama voting Democrat. She has time in the military. She was under financial strain, but she was also, from what I've read, like, in a polyamorous relationship. And she was also a QAnon supporter. And so it's kind of fascinating. Like, she represents that kind of like, I don't want to say like lumpen bourgeoisie, you maybe could say.
Well, yeah, but like this is why we're not going to see a vaxxer versus anti-vaxxer civil war, because if that was like a real crowd in like another country, like they would have been enraged at one of their members getting shot. Like you hear about these like civil unrest scenarios.
Pretty enraged.
No, they would have swarmed that police officer.
They kind of did.
No, they would have been like, hey, they killed one of us, so we're going after them. So it's not like an us versus them scenario.
Well, it's a total us versus them scenario, and they did beat up the police. I mean, they were engaging in serious shit. My criticism of January 6th is that it was an incompetent coup. Like, it was totally buffoonish. It was based on like Tea Party energy and then some like bogus legal shenanigans. It wasn't like, Juan Perón would go in there, like get the military backing, etc. He would it would be like clockwork. That thing was just like the expression of the conservatives.
Well,
It's just like it doesn't know what it wants. It's loony. It's crazy. But I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, to their credit, I guess. I mean, they were like beating the shit out of the police officers.
yeah, but like I'm just saying, like I've read about like scenarios of like real instability, and like the crowd would have like they would be, they would take it as like a personal insult, and they weren't doing that.
Okay.
They're like, oh
well,
no,
I don't want to get. We're splitting hairs here.
yeah,
So
okay, sorry. Zach.
does someone else want to who hasn't talked to you guys? There's Bronze Age Fortunate Islander, Crow
Yo.
Marta Fly. You guys can just speak if you want to say something.
I find it really like disappointing when you look. There are some realities that come with COVID that like the media won't talk about, but we're like drowned out by these crazy people who think the vaccine is the mark of the beast. And I think it's used by the ruling class to like get people to not look into things that are, there's people who've made a lot of money from these vaccines and certain companies that have benefited from the lockdowns, but nobody's talking about that because one side is obsessed with mark of the beasts and Freemasons and all this nonsense. It's disappointing.
Yeah.
Pharmaceutical companies being profitable is not inherently a bad thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, on one level, I think there's a certain pragmatism to like, we want a vaccine and some people are going to make money off it, but I do agree with you. Like there's been a tremendous, like unbelievable financial boom, maybe bubble of elite companies during this pandemic. And that's kind of washed away by like, oh, what did Marjorie Taylor Greene say this week? I think that's right.
And I actually think if we're going to get back to topic, there is sort of like I do think that many of these like grifters, I think who encourage their fan base to not vaccinate. I think they should have some civil liability if someone who would have otherwise taken the vaccine, who doesn't take the vaccine because they like listen to Joe Rogan or Quintus or something like that, and they sort of like die. I think there are probably like many people who are like that. I think they should be civilly reliable. I mean, because it is basically if you would have some sort of like evangelical preacher on TV who says you should throw away your cancer medication and try this homeopathy I sell instead, and try like this veterinary medicine. I mean, it is sort of like disgraceful that these people, that there are not any kind of lawsuits against them.
I agree. I mean, there might very well be. I mean, at the very least, you can say it's on the margins and it's very small. But I think this will actually affect like elections going forward, in the sense that, the unvaccinated are to a very large degree MAGA fans, and they are influenced by these grifter types, and they are literally dying. It's not a joke. I mean, how many? I mean, it's kind of like a liberal meme, and it's maybe not something we should laugh at, but like how many like 50 to 60-year-old local conservative radio talkers died over the past year and a half? I mean, they were dropping like flies, and you see these photos of them, and they all kind of similar. They're like heavy set Midwestern white guys who are like, I'm not taking the damn vax or whatever. And the next thing you know, their family is raising money for a funeral on, Go Send Me or whatever. I mean, it's very sad. They have made a bad choice, but it's real. And like, I don't know. I mean, it's small because this is, this pandemic isn't like killing off 10% of the population. It's less than 1%, but like, it's very small, but like, it's going to affect demographics and it's going to affect voting patterns in some level.
Yeah, I saw like an interesting stat that young Democrats are more likely to get vaccinated than old Republicans, and this is like and the Republicans, they also like the party of the sort of like obese old white fat guys, and so they are like definitely gonna take a big they are going to take a big hit in the elections.
Yeah.
I think it's really common.
Significant enough to make a difference in the election.
Jeff says
I think it's
it
really
will make a
common.
difference, is what you just said?
I don't think they're actually big enough.
You don't think it's big enough, or you do think it's big enough? I just can't hear you.
Do not.
You do not. That's a fair point.
Maybe it will cancel out with like progressives who are against big pharma or something.
Well,
You know, Jimmy
they
Dole
were
listeners,
They
you
were
can
against
imagine
big
wouldn't
pharma
take the
until
vaccine.
2020, when they were like, "Oh, excuse me," as I die of COVID here while doing the space. Don't have COVID. Just if you're just tuned in, I actually took a test. Just have the common cold, but all of these liberal progressives hated big pharma until 2020, and then they're like, "Oh, the Fauci jab is going to save everyone. We can go out and get on Tinder again."
But like, I mean, the person like the Jimmy Dore listener still hates big pharma, and like a lot of them haven't taken the vaccine, as I understand.
Yes.
Like, you can imagine that would hurt the progressive voters.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like the AOC voter would be more likely to be dead than the Hillary Clinton voter, is what I mean.
Definitely.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with like what a lot of you guys are saying, but one thing I'm a little skeptical about is like I guess the extent to which these like right-wing grifters are actually grifting about anti-vax, about telling people not to take the vaccine, because I feel like, I mean, of course, you see a lot of anti-vax mandate, sentiment that's disseminated by any like right-wing viewpoint, but I don't necessarily see any like top politicians or pundits in very prominent positions outright decrying the vaccine and saying people shouldn't get it, more that they should just take their own have their own choice, right? Are there examples of right-wing prominent figures who are saying just don't take the vaccine?
Yes, there are
like Alex Jones types. Like they're prominent enough. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's fair. But I feel like I mean but Alex Jones is almost like he represents a decidedly like dissident population. Like I don't think that like
he's
for
mainstream
for example,
GOP. He represents
he's
the
mainstream to some
of the
extent.
GOP.
But for example, like he vehemently rails against QAnon, and perhaps for good reason. But clearly in that sense, he doesn't exactly represent, for example, like the median of like the MAGA population.
I don't know who you're apologizing here for, but I'm not buying.
He's just doing that for optics, like because QAnon is such bad optics now.
Well, I think also he's knocking out his competition.
QAnon's competing with Alex Jones. But also, a lot of conservatives may as well be saying don't take the like. There's an argument, or I guess people like I don't know. Sean Hannity's not saying don't take the vax. He might even say it's good to do it. I know Ben Shapiro told people to take it, but
Dennis
a lot
Prager.
of even slightly edgier right-wing populist types, even if they don't say don't take the vax, like they may as well be saying it. Like, we're just talking about how people got blood clots in their brain and myocarditis, and a million people have died or whatever. But it's about medical freedom. Like, there's no difference there in the audience.
Brett Weinstein has been more against the vaccination than like Ben Shapiro.
Oh, Brett Weinstein, like Bartomeu brought up the liability. I mean, look, I at some level, Brett Weinstein has killed people. I'm sorry, he just has. And there are these cases of one of them was really interesting. I mean, I hate to say interesting because the man died, but because he was an intelligent guy, and I believe he actually was Oxford educated. And he was doing these live streams of catching COVID. He was overweight, so he was probably like 100 pounds overweight or something. But he was clearly an intelligent fellow, and he was live streaming his death due to Brett Weinstein's nonsense. And it's like, I don't know what to say. Like on some level, I mean, you are kind of liable, at least like morally speaking. You are giving out really terrible information, and you're engaging in bad faith analysis, as like Magnus was saying, where it's like, hey, look, go get a vaccine. But, have you looked at the VAERS stats lately? I mean, someone's face burned off after they got the vaccine. I mean, I don't know what happened. I'm just asking questions. Like, when you engage in that level of like just bad faith criticism or Jimmy Dore or whatever, you are basically encouraging people not to get the vaccine. And, Brett Weinstein just putting out just total nonsense. Like, a guy was like, I mean, in this case, I think he might very well be legally liable. I mean, a guy was just doing his plan of action and he clearly died due to it. I mean, it is kind of serious shit on some level. This isn't just like talking about taxes or whatever. Like, it's just the rubber hits the road and conservatards get killed by this.
Well, what I have to say to all of this is the only problem here is that this needs to be a health crisis, and that's where it needs to stop. Unvaccinated should not be associated to anything but a vaccine as the same thing as someone who's vaccinated. It shouldn't be associated with your level of intellect or your political party or what you ate last night. It should mean I didn't get the vaccine because I didn't get the vaccine or vaccinated, right? That's what the issue is, because it just creates too much drama and division and all that other stuff. That's why we're
Well,
in this
I
position right now.
agree. I mean, I think that, when it comes to like vaccines for measles, no one does their own research or goes and polls Facebook to learn more about the possible side effects of the measles vaccine. They're only doing it about this one. So I agree with you. It just should be about health. But, on a couple of different levels, I mean, just to be a little bit harsh about it, not everyone is a critical thinker who should be making decisions for themselves. And why is it as a society that we can't just force people to obey? To put it really brutally, to put it a little more gently, why have we lost the ability to kind of cohere as a society and just make these correct decisions? I think there are a lot of different causes to that.
I think number one, first and foremost, has to be the dishonesty of the media, though. Like, that has to be sort of because it's so in certain cases it's really just so blatant. I mean, I don't know. I don't think this is going to be a popular thing to say in this space per se, but just to use, I mean, a prominent like today example like Rittenhouse. I mean, I think a lot of even people who were like in the past, like, blue pill or like they're very anti Rittenhouse, like saw the way who actually watched the trial and see everything unfold and see in real time how dishonesty CNN and MSNBC and a lot of the mainstream was in this case, and that feels a lot of really. I mean, just from personal, and I think most of us can probably speak to this personal experience. Like, I've never really felt that emotionally invested in such a in anything in particular, but or like any specific event. But like, damn, I'll be honest, like I almost shed a tear when the verdict came back, because it was just so clear that he was. I mean, not that he was necessarily he's not a hero by any stretch. I mean, he shouldn't have been there. It's true. He didn't have to put himself in that situation, but he wasn't guilty of murder, and he certainly wasn't a white supremacist, and blah, 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 and like, Proud Boy Association, and people just, again, obviously Proud Boy just happens to have a white nationalist association to it, warranted or not. And so, and so it really evokes a strong emotional reaction. I think that, and it's a righteous kind of outrage. I think that whether correct or incorrect is not the point, but the fact is the fact that the media is demonstrably dishonest makes people question everything. I think that has to be the place where it starts.
Trust is everything. If you don't have trust, you have nothing at all. You see, these vaccine mandates wouldn't even be necessary if people had trust in those who are providing it, and it's as simple as that.
Okay, Mr. N-Dog, you said that the Rittenhouse case caused the credibility of the media to collapse. Is that what you said?
I think that it was already collapsing, but I think that it accelerated it. Yes, I think it generated additional momentum in that direction. Okay,
well, do you think maybe you already agreed with the Rittenhouse verdict that he was innocent, and maybe other people have a different perspective? Maybe it's not so unifying. Maybe people see the Rittenhouse case and they think differently. that he was guilty.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, I
think there's very few people.
I
think there's very few people who saw the entire thing on TV. You know, they were working or doing other things. So I think the number of people who actually cared is smaller than you might think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't deny those premises to some extent, but I think that the vast majority, and these are even the people that I talk to, actually watch the case. It's kind of difficult to come away with the notion that he wasn't acting in a self-defense manner. Like, even from the left,
but like,
arguments that I've heard,
I would push back on this a little bit. So I don't totally disagree with, I mean, this is going back to like a space I did, I guess, like a week and a half ago, but I don't totally disagree with the notion that he is not guilty of a murder charge, that he got off on a self-defense charge. I get that. I did not study the case intimately, but likely that's the right decision. But I also would try to get you back to like understanding your id brain, your unconscious as opposed to your conscious. Like, the reason, I'm sorry, but the reason why you like Kyle Rittenhouse is because he blew away some Antifa scum. And the reason why liberals are so convinced...
I wholeheartly disagree with that. I don't care who he killed. I really do. It really doesn't matter to me. I don't even. Like,
but hang on.
A boy that made a
would you defend
mistake.
Kyle Rittenhouse for a black person?
But he did. But in fact, he was being attacked and he defended himself.
Yeah. Okay.
It's as simple as that. Like,
look,
whether it's Antifa or not, I don't give a shit.
Wait, are you sure you don't care if whether it's Antifa or not? Because Kyle got a flying kick to the face from a black guy. He didn't shoot him. You know for a fact that if Kyle, his victims were white, and I know one of them had one of them was a pedophile, but the other two weren't. He killed 2 of them, shot 3, but he didn't dare shoot that black guy. And you know that contards wouldn't have touched this with a 10-foot pole if his victims had been black. He would have been railroaded.
I don't know if conservatives wouldn't have touched it.
Well,
I think we're to the point where they might.
But hang on, everyone. End dogs. What are your opinion on Ashley Babbitt? Because I see because Ashley Babbitt, she was like a rioter who got shot, and like conservatives like, oh my God, this is police brutality. This is so horrible that the police.
Wait, hold on.
Conservatives didn't talk about Ashley Babbitt the same way, though.
No. Hang on. No, I'm speaking now. No, I'm speaking now. But anyway, Ashley Babbitt, she got shot, and this was like because she rioted, and the conservative love her, but Kyle Rittenhouse, I mean, it's sort of like the reverse. Like, he shot a rioter, and now the sort of like rioters are sort of suddenly.
Yeah, I know.
Hold on. I have to push back.
It's
because
just about polarization, then.
No, I have to push back because I do know that I feel like conservatives dropped Babbitt like a hot potato. I've talked to contards, pardon the language, but I've talked to rightoids in real life, and they say like, "Oh, well, she had it coming. She went after a cop. Blue lives matter." Like, that stuff runs deep. Like, because they think.
Well, I disagree.
It changed throughout
we're using anecdotes, but like Trump himself gave a like pain to Ashley Babbitt. I mean, he did a video about how like Ashley is one of us and we lost a great American and blah blah blah. And some of these groups that are maybe not exactly mainstream, they're not exactly Fox News, but like they're just below it. Like Tea Party like groups are like just going all religious on Ashley Babbitt. And
I thought Trump waited like half a year to do that.
Tucker Carlson said, we need to know why Ashley Babbitt was executed. Like, it just the language he used is just highly, highly sympathetic. I don't think they've.
I thought Trump waited like half a year to do that. It was just kind of like just bait. Like 6 months later.
Well, he did it nevertheless.
That might have been a response to his base, I think, with the Ashley Babbitt thing in particular. Like, conservative media didn't immediately make a martyr out of her, but it kind of became that way later. That it's like the vaccine thing. like the kind of the Trump base wasn't going to let it go and like latched onto it. But mainstream conservatives took a while to, because at first they like made it a point to condemn J6 all the time, and they'll still say like, you know, we don't condone breaking into the Capitol, but then they'll make everyone out to be a martyr and talk about how horribly they're being mistreated. The tone was very different right after it happened. Like they would still talk about the left's double standards about rioting, but it was far less sympathetic in the weeks after it happened.
Right.
But they're kind of responding to their audience who loved it, because their audience were the people who went into the Capitol.
It's kind of ironic because like they're the reason Ashley Babbitt's dead today.
Yeah,
because of their rhetoric.
Okay, well,
no question.
That's true. Yeah, no question. It's also part of the conservative media complex, which I say is astroturfed. I think if we still had the fairness doctrine, it wouldn't last. This polarization is fake. There's one side is culpable.
Huh.
I don't know. That's what I think. Yeah, but secondly, this Blue Lives Matter stuff, it runs very deep. I mean, I know I'm going anecdotal here, but like I talk to like rightoids in real life, and I actually know a cop. My uncle is a cop, and they brag that I'm not racist. I would shoot a white suspect too. So, you know, I feel like this stuff runs very, very deep. It's like multiple levels of psyop.
It's one of the main disconnects, I think, between the conservatives and edgy conservatives who are just on the fringe. Is like the rejection of the Blue Lives Matter stuff. I mean, you saw the Proud Boys rejecting it early, but they're half white nationalists now. But even like, you know, slightly edgier, like who would have been alt-right, are kind of doing away with the Blue Lives Matter. But someone like, I don't know, Ben Shapiro can't do that. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know what's going to become of that. That is like one of the major divides within the whole conservative structure that exists.
In terms of the rejection of that, I mean, it's mostly like because of dumb stuff. Like, trying to think, like, what did Nick Fuentes say? Like, he wants to make, or like Derek Chauvin would have made your grandma wear a mask or something like that. So it's like, it's like really dumb rhetoric. A lot of the like conservative ACAB stuff I see.
Yeah. Anyone, we want to change topic a little bit, or go back to symbolism of COVID?
Yes, I have like some notes here which I have written down. Like you have like said earlier that you were talking about how conservatives talk about going to common sense, but they're sort of like going like anti-common sense, because I think that most people here, in like subjects which are not political, when they're getting sick or something, they go and see a doctor. If they have like a heart problem, they see a cardiologist and so forth. So like listen to the expert is sort of like the common sense thing to do. I mean, it's not to do. Yeah, it's not to go on Facebook and see what and take like advice from some Facebook boomer about which is sort of like veterinary medicine is best for treating this ailment. So it is like that. And there is sort of like another thing that there was like you need sort of like force to have to make like a society work. So I almost like wished. I don't really believe that the West is under like COVID tyranny, but I sort of wish that it was true. I think it's sort of like funny when it's like right wings like post about, oh my God, they are like taking away all our freedoms and they're forcing all of us to get vaxxed, and it's like terrible that people who are not vaccinated don't get exactly the same treatment as people who are vaccinated. And I like wish there were like more of that, so people can understand that we live in a society and everyone needs to follow the social contract, and sort of like yes, I mean citizens have obligations to each other. I mean for a advanced society to function, and there is sort of like this very like toxic individualism, which has sort of, it is sort of like bizarre that it's sort of like entrenched is sort of like far right. I mean, because in theory, like these people are like supposed to like Hitler and Mussolini. and they will not really individualist. But you see that it's like bizarre combination of American individualism and they sort of like have a swastika and wear swastika, and it's like incredibly bizarre behavior.
What if you're not getting vaccinated out of misanthropy, though? I think that's the best take.
What?
We
like, I don't know.
IQ intervention. To quote Yale.
That was kind of a joke, but I don't know what, like, I don't feel a civic duty to, like, keep people safe or anything. Like, I don't care enough about my fellow man to do the slightest thing in this way.
Yeah,
in, like,
I have a
2021 America
streak as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, another thing on polarization is both the right and the left wish the other. So the right wants the left to die from some satanic vaccine, and the left wants the right to die from not taking the vaccine. So it reminds me of that movie, The Hunt, where The Hunt is basically where a bunch of liberals, kidnap a bunch of mega tards or whatever and put them in this scenario where it's kind of like where they hunt them down, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's called The Hunt. But yeah, it's like a catharsis type situation where, of course, we live in a somewhat pacified, of course, there's gun violence and all that, but a pacified political scenario where we just imagine the death of our enemies and kind of like a virtual world or political speak. I mean, of course, people are dying from COVID, but it's not as bad as at least what I thought it was going to be. But yeah, of course, people are dying, but they want them to die, right? They want these people on the left and the right to die. So we've kind of exited. The only racial paradigm I see here is I know that there is a racial breakdown on the amount of deaths that kind of are what we find in many other statistics in like crime statistics where it goes, black, Mexican, white, Asian. It's just the same pattern on the death stats, but when it comes down to it, it's just a right-left divide, right? So, and both of them just want to see each other die from being stupid. It's all a kind of a gotcha game.
I don't agree with that. I think that's an overly black-pilled take, and I think that the average, whether it be someone that does take the vaccine or someone that chooses not to, has nowhere near any sentiments of wanting the other side to actually, like, just to prove their point. I think, like, that's a vanishingly small percentage of, like, the internet population that really believes that.
No, I think this is a base. It's kind of in the reptilian brain where people, you want to be right, so you want your opposition to kind of lose in the ultimate sense.
It's
like,
more so on the left, though.
It's like now a death.
Sure.
A death is more of a.
When someone.
1 second. A death is more of a political statement than, oh my gosh, someone just died of COVID or someone just died of vaccine injury. Can we just take a moment? Can we just take a moment to, like, mourn with the family? No, it's more about, oh, we just made a point right now.
Yeah, I think the on both. I mean, I guess it's on both sides. I definitely saw Schadenfreude on liberal sides. I mean, I would see these things. I mean, and it is a real phenomenon that should be addressed. But like, I would see these things of like another right-wing talk show host who was anti-vax just died of COVID. And there was clearly a kind of malign undercurrent to that of like, fuck them.
Yeah, I agree.
And
it was more so on the right, or on the left. It was like, look at this idiot who didn't get vaccinated. But if someone got complications from the vaccine, the right would be like, look at this poor victim of the evil vaccine, the Satan juice or whatever. Mm-hmm. It was a different tone, but maybe that's also because COVID is a lot more deadly than the vaccine, and there were just more examples of the
of it happening that way. I don't know. I mean, I feel the
I
same way
think
as
I've
you, man.
mentioned this on some other spaces. It was funny when Mark Brahman came to visit me. I think in late August or something like that. We were just talking about like the whole history of the alt-right and this journey or whatever. And neither of us had looked at Andrew Anglin's website, The Daily Stormer, for years, and we barely looked at it in 2016. But we just looked at it. We're like, I wonder what he's up to. What is he saying? Literally every single post was anti-vax. And it was all this like weird implication that like the vax turned you gay, or that the Jews were behind the COVID or whatever. Like none of it made sense. I mean, like Israel is like a very highly vaccinated country. I mean, none of it made sense, but it was just it was weird that this like former neo-Nazi, guy it was like if you put aside some of the anti-Semitism, he was just indistinguishable from mainstream conservatives, and fascinating in its way. I think he is like not really relevant anymore, but it's still kind of fascinating that that's the direction he goes in. I haven't looked at his site since then. I would be curious. I assume that he's up to his same shenanigans.
That may be an example, though, of like the emergent like position, like sort of, obfuscating the arguments that lie underneath, and that I don't necessarily like hearing what you said about what arguments he was making for why people shouldn't take the vaccine doesn't sound anywhere really congruent to what I've heard like mainstream conservatives talk about when it comes to not choosing not to take the vaccine.
You're just apologizing for mainstream conservatives.
No, I mean,
I think the whole thing is under the umbrella of kind of the apocalyptic genre of post-exilic Jewish kind of literature, where we're kind of in this culture of it's a Judeo-Christian culture, so everyone's kind of hoping for the end, and the left kind of wants nature to kill us off. They want whether it's global warming or a virus, and the right kind of is hoping for the Antichrist to put a chip in them and declare he's 666. But like in this apocalyptic genre, you have two groups. You have the group that does heed the warning, and then the group that in Luke 12 says we're going to eat, drink, and be merry. And that's kind of the Republican Party, versus the left would be the ones that usually flip out, right, and declare the end of the world. And the right says they're just using it for political power. So there's this kind of this idea of the apocalyptic genre is really ingrained in America, whether it be the world wars, Cold War, or any end time scenario with global warming, or even this somewhat. I mean, I think it's forced, but COVID is somewhat of an apocalyptic idea, but I do think it's forced, and it's more irrational than it is rational. But of course, I still, it's hard to stay sober under these kind of paradigms, because the idea is to kind of create this drama and have it's part of this apocalyptic idea within the American mythos.
So, Richard, you mentioned the conservatives dying off, the low-level guys. I kind of have a bit of a theory about why the Republican Party is bending over backwards to satisfy these anti-vaxxers.
Okay.
And I think the ultimate point of it is to destabilize the United States, particularly the Biden government, because they know that letting community spread happen will destroy the economy and will lead to hundreds of thousands of deaths. And they're already blaming Biden for having more deaths than Trump did. And I think ultimately it's going to be unsuccessful. The economy is doing well, but it's not going to end. They're going to roll this op up, but they're going to do another op that's probably just as damaging or deadly to try to head off electoral apocalypse in 2024. That's just my take.
So they want more chaos just to kind of make Biden look bad?
Yeah. I mean, the worse the economy is, the worse people are feeling, right? I mean, you got to put on a mask to go to the store. That's dreary, you know? People can't go to work. Some factories and supply chains, you know about the supply chain chaos. That's having an effect. You're seeing that in inflation. I think they know it all. You know, I mean, whether hundreds of thousands of people die, it's still going to be chaos. You know, millions of people getting sick through community spread. And I think they are literally killing their base in order to own the libs. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think they're trying to destabilize the Biden government. And, you know, ultimately, this might come down to their kind of civil war scenario, which, you know, is going to be a blue states versus red states things. We don't really have a stake in it. And I think the working class of the country doesn't have a stake in it. But, you know, I think ultimately, when the Republicans lost control of the presidency in the 90s, they started to freak out because they knew that democratic hegemony was possible and probable and even likely. And the United States is moving increasingly towards being a one-party state, whether you like it or not.
Interesting. Let me digest that a little bit. I sometimes wonder about. I mean,
what do you mean by one party state?
I said this to a degree in an article I wrote or I guess around a year ago, where I was like, you know, we had this blue period from FDR on, and you could even say that it finally cracked in 1994. So you had almost like 60 years of pretty strong liberal hegemony. Now, realignment kind of occurred in the late, 70s, 80s, but it was 94 when you really had this like red state, blue state divide. And then we've had this like quasi-red period of Congress where Republicans have done quite well in Congress since the mid-90s. And I was suggesting that this was actually coming to an end. But I don't know. I mean, I think Republicans are going to likely do very well in 2022, and I think there's an interesting growth of like the Hispanic Republican, which is goes against all white nationalist theories of politics, and I think just even something like the Youngkin thing, where you can just win purely on culture war issues. And in Virginia, I think these things are real. And I don't know. I think we might have this like 51-49, 49-51 flip, going back and forth again and again for some time before it fundamentally flips. Go ahead, Magnus.
I was talking to some people a little while ago, some of whom are in the space, who were kind of predicting like a short-term conservative revolution.
Yeah.
And do you think that'll happen? And if so, how long do you think like a kind of another red period will last?
Well, I mean, I think the current red period has more legs than maybe I gave it credit for a year ago. But yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a conservative revolution to some extent. I mean, I generally think that the GOP is going to win back the House at least in next year. And I'm not alone. This is a conventional opinion, in fact. And at the very least, they're going to do good. I mean, look, post-Biden, I mean, the liberals running like Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg, or that is just, I mean, give me a break. No one, that is going to offend a lot of people. And I don't see a lot of strength there. So I could see that happening. The other thing, which is interesting, which we could go back like historically. So in 1980, with George Herbert Walker Bush, he was actually a pro-choice Republican when he started out running and when he ran for president previously. By 1980, the kind of post-segregation religious right had taken over the apparatus of the party to such a degree that Reagan flipped to being pro-life, George Herbert Walker Bush flipped to be pro-life, et cetera. And I think we are seeing that absolutely in the GOP now. Like, a lot of these leaders, even someone like Mitch McConnell, is going to have to like pander to the base. And the base is very similar to the religious right base, but it's kind of dropped a lot of the actual religion, and it's just wingnut tartary.
One thing that I think is interesting with in the United States is that even though the Democrats has younger voter overall, I mean the leadership is like very old compared to. I mean there are like several sort of like young or youngish Republicans. I mean you got the sort of like a wheelchair guy in Congress. I mean who made like who get a lot of impression. I mean, but you don't see any like white equivalent to AOC or Ilhan Omar. I mean, like most of the sort of like, despite the fact that they have like a large base of working class white people. I mean, so it is sort of like bizarre that you have like this party which is for like the working class white people, but they don't have any people who really represent them. I mean, they have, as you said, like Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg and people like that who, I mean, they don't have any connection to the sort of like voters. So, yeah, I mean, the Republicans, I mean, their leaderships are much more representative of their voters. So the Democrats are going to have like a bit of like a crisis when the sort of like Biden and Nancy Pelosi generation dies off, which is going to be in the next 10 years or so.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Well, I definitely do think there are countervailing trends, and so it's democratic hegemony isn't necessarily inevitable, but I think it's likely. And as far as that goes, I mean, I think I have an unconventional opinion, an unconventionally conventional opinion, in that I think Biden's running in 2024.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to win. And so where that puts the party out in 2028, it's hard to say. But if you look at the trends with the economy, it's growing 7% this year. It'll probably grow around 5%, maybe even upwards of 7% next year. And so there's a real chance that Biden's first term is remembered as a massive economic boom, much like the Clinton term. And I think that will have an upward effect on Democrats' electoral fortunes, in spite of identity politics, in spite of culture war. Those things will still be in play. But I do think that, you know, we look at the Democrats and we kind of laugh at how cringe they are and how out of touch they are. But I think in 2024, that might be a different story if people are generally doing better. And like I said, again, I do actually think that the Republicans wanted to prevent that from happening. They wanted the Biden's first term to be as disastrous as possible. And they nearly got it. They damn well nearly got it. But I guess that's it.
Yeah, and I think it is sort of interesting because in the Republican convention last year, like Trump talked about the sort of like speakers they had, they talked about the corona crisis or coronavirus in past tense and talked about, well, we had this virus and now President Trump has defeated it or something like that. But as soon as like Biden became elected, it suddenly became his virus, and they were talking about the Beijing Biden and stuff like that. So they don't really have any. I mean, it is interesting how how quick their voters. I mean, their voters are basically lemmings, and they basically fold like extremely easily, and they don't have any long-term memory about these
Right,
things.
Bard.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I agree. One thing I wanted to say is that the point of sort of COVID denial in 2020 was about keeping stocks up. Now that's no longer the case. I think for the GOP, if stocks fall through the floor, it's a good thing because it looks bad for Biden, right? So, like, I think the rationale in some level, the Machiavellian rationale for COVID denialism has changed, right? So now I think it's about causing as much chaos as possible. But in 2020, it was trying to keep things as stable as possible so Trump didn't lose the election, which of course he did. Obviously, Trump subverted himself by not putting down the riots. But, in the end, he failed to control COVID. He failed to control the riots. And I think the GOP knows they missed their shot. And they could be in the wilderness for a very, very long time, countervailing trends notwithstanding.
No, I definitely get that, and I've said similar things myself. I mean, I think the only thing I would add to that is I think Trump kind of weirdly benefited from the riots, even though they're all happening under his watch, because they were played on Fox News under, headlines like "This is Biden's America" and so on. So he was in this weird, it's a bizarre kind of dialectical situation where it's like allowing them to go forward and allowing them to take life on social media and cable news, etc. Actually kind of benefited. It was a great benefit to him because it brought it, it really accessed the kind of id brain of conservatives.
Yeah.
Well, if you watch Fox, go on, Bart.
Excuse me. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I thought it is sort of like interesting because then sort of like Giga Chad Biden came in and posted Corona fascism on everyone, and all the sort of like riots stopped. So, I mean, it is interesting when you like compare the sort of like how President Biden have reacted to the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. I mean, compared to how Trump reacted with the BLM shootings, and because like Trump poured gasoline on the fires on Twitter, and he did this really during the Iran crisis too, and sort of like talked about how he would bomb ancient ruins and archaeological artifacts, and sort of like bragged about it on Twitter in like a very disgusting fashion. And he did the same thing during the riots, and then talked about and basically inflaming people too. And then he blamed it on the Democrats, despite that he had like all the power to stop it. And they sort of and like all of this like stopped then when. And I also think that in some of like these democratic cities I think they all turned, not turned the other cheek, but they looked the other way. And during this, because it was election season, and in cities like Portland, for instance, or I mean, they sort of like cracked down on the riots like almost directly after Biden had won the election.
So both sides had political incentive to keep the riots going. Yeah,
exactly.
It's true.
If
anything, the Democrats felt like it had gone too far. There was actually a remarkable moment in like September or something where Biden and Harris came out and they did a speech, and they're like, well, we all agree with free speech and protests, but no one agrees with lawlessness and mayhem. They realized that it had taken on a new life and was becoming kind of just nihilistic and really bad for their image. All right, guys. I'm going to do. Let's do a little lightning round, and I'm going to call it a night. This has been a good talk. Anyone want to get in something like they haven't had a chance to speak? I'll let you speak, and then I might kick you off the speakers list and let other people jump in.
Yeah, I got a quick question for you, Richard.
Okay.
One thought that I had that I found interesting was, especially if you remember early on during like Operation Warp Speed and whatnot, like Trump was calling it the Trump vaccine. And early on, it really seemed like the Republicans were going to own this as their big achievement. It was only after Democrats kind of got a hold of the election and whatnot that it flipped over. And I wonder if Democrats had just said, hey, this election or this vaccine is free. You can go to your local pharmacy and go get it. How many people just would have quietly gone and gotten the vaccine, and Republicans would have kept calling it the Trump vaccine, and it would have been, not as political as an issue that it is now.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what we were saying before. I mean, I was suggesting, I'm not sure I agree with it, but I was suggesting that there's almost like an on-off switch or like an A-B where everything has to be polarized, and so it just had to be polarized in one direction. I'm not sure about that. I was suggesting it. I think it might have deeper psychological elements, but there's no question that Trump, again, would have run re-election if he had become a COVID fascist. The other fascinating thing is during the vice presidential debate, I mean, Kamala Harris went full Q-tard, I mean, of the left, and was basically like, I mean, I think she said, I ain't taking no Trump vaccine or something like that. It was just so, viciously stupid and just kind of just partisan to a level that's just insulting. It's just, it's like as if Trump made the vaccine or something. I mean, it's just give me a break. Yeah, I mean, it again, that's of course flipped. It's the same vaccine that was done under Operation Warp Speed that Trump oversaw at the very least.
Richard.
Anyway, okay. Bartamu, you make your point quick, then I'll move on to Alexei and Bronze.
Yes, I sort of had I had one last thing written down. I think this whole scenario has proven that how in a foremost anti-vax are, because because all of them, they call this drug experimental, but I remember in 2020 they came out every other week in the Guardian and the BBC and so forth, and sort of talking about this is what stage this is where we are in this trial now with this vaccine, and how is the research going. They were publishing that every other week, and I think it's sort of proves that sort of right wingers, they don't read the newspapers and they don't follow the news, and that's what's my last point.
Yeah. All right. Alexei, you have something to say?
Okay. I want to just say something about a COVID statistic, which I think a lot of people maybe viscerally know on some level, but it's not really been talked about, and that is that the majority of people who have died from COVID are actually overweight. So
Yes.
About 2/3 of America are overweight. About half of those are actually obese. So the majority of America is overweight. And if you actually look at the statistics, basically if you're healthy, it's very rare that you would, die from this. And so I think it's really sad that we've shut everything down. And it's not really, I mean, whether you've gone totally apeshit and tyrannical mode and just shut everything down and everyone's in a bubble, or you've gone the opposite way, we've all achieved herd immunity regardless of lockdowns or not. And so I think that there's this for lack of a better term feminine quality to a lot of the arguments I hear of almost glorifying harm avoidance, where it's oh, people died and this is the end all and be all, and it's yeah, I understand that people died and I'm sorry about that, but that's not a trump card you can use, pardon the pun, to just destroy society and have everyone live in a pod and be totally isolated. I think what comes to mind is something that Apple wanted to do a long time ago, which was install software in concert with law enforcement to scan your pictures to see if anyone had child porn. And it's okay, you can't just say we're trying to stop people from having child porn and everyone's expected rights to privacy go away. And I think that's similar. I mean, child porn's not the same as this, but it's just analogous to this thing you can use as people died, therefore we have to do this thing. And it just doesn't seem in concert with the facts of what we've seen in terms of lockdowns on the one hand, draconianly, and then on the other hand, some countries not doing that, and they both sort of achieve the same sort of statistics. It doesn't really, it just seems to have been a total overreaction. And I think really what would have helped, at least in the United States, where we've had a lot more deaths like per capita than most countries, is if we were just healthier people. And maybe that has a lot to do with the fact that we don't have a national health service like a lot of other countries, especially in the developed world. But like people have to take care of themselves on a personal level, at some level, before like we can imagine that we're going to survive something like this. We've been hit so hard, I think, because of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
yeah, real quick. I mean, you're hitting a lot of good points. I mean, I think the obesity thing is just something we're not willing to acknowledge the fact that there is a very, very strong correlation between hospitalizations and deaths and obesity. And it's not like I think there was a lot of thought like at the beginning of the crisis where it's like it was so novel and so overwhelming that it was almost like God striking down people randomly, or like Apollo sending a plague or something. It was this like act of God, but it's ultimately revealed like really important aspects of the society. And absolutely, obesity is one. Childhood obesity is a major issue. I mean, it's just absolutely. Okay, bronze age fortunate islander. Why don't you jump in and we'll be out of here in 4 minutes or so.
You asked earlier why we can't mobilize society to take a certain direction and agree that doing something is for the best of everyone. And I think that's, other than like a few spiritual colonies in Europe that are basically obsessed with America and the United States and like Canada as well, the obsession with freedom on the right, it's not even really actually conservative. Like there's an argument to be made that, I don't want to sound like some traditionalist, but caring about the well-being of the society, that's why we had, social rules in like Christianity, for example. That is an actual conservative point to take, that we should care about the greater whole and the individual doesn't matter so much.
Yeah, totally. And the fact that the right wing reacts to just the natural nationalistic outcomes of COVID is just kind of amazing. COVID has been about staying at home and closing the borders. And who hates that at the end of the day? Conservatives. They rage against it. Shows something, maybe even reveals something about liberal elites as well. Okay, Brendan Gomez, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll just say real quick that I think the conservative base believes, from their point of view, that they are fighting a holy war, and then there are upper management in the Republican Party which wants to make the economy look bad and blame it on Biden. And I think this sort of behavior will continue for the next couple decades, even though Biden will be reelected.
Okay. All right. Let's. Anyone else want to jump in the next 2 minutes? Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about your opinion on the Sines versus Kessler verdicts, and specifically the appeal process.
Well, I guess you guys will be seeing my opinion on that pretty soon. We're not at a point where there would be appeals. We're in the post-trial motions phase. I would. To talk about Sines v. Kessler, like it's a very mixed message. It's a mixed verdict that was sent. So the big ones that the plaintiffs were reaching for, and that was really the raison d'etre of the whole thing, there was a hung jury. So that is basically sections 1985 and 1986, U.S. Code 142. And no conclusion was reached to that by the jury. Now, there were some major punitive damages on like smaller issues. And then James Fields himself is basically in a situation of no contest. I mean, he is effectively admitted to all of the things that he's being accused of. There was no contest on his, it was only a matter of how much they're going to get from him. Now, whether that will result in money or not is questionable. But it's a very mixed thing. I'm still kind of formulating my exact plan, but I don't know what's going to happen. There's a possibility the plaintiffs are going to retry this because they didn't get what they want. I think there was some headlines about white nationalists have to pay millions or whatever. Well, you read a little bit below there and you see that the plaintiffs didn't get what they want. And even in some key cases, the number one name, Sines versus Kessler, she was awarded no money. Elizabeth Sines. So it's a mixed thing. I definitely am very interested in appeal process, but I'm interested in what's going to happen in the post-trial process.
I think I read somewhere that the punitive damages are limited to 10 times the compensatory damages, but then sometimes they're only like $1 or something. So
it's ambiguous. That is operative to me for a certain extent, but let's just say that there's a lot of ambiguity going on, and we shall see. Okay, anyone want to jump in real quick? And let's see here. Not PAX, Radar, really quick, and then I'm going to go. Just speak your piece, and then I'm off. Okay. All right, guys, good space. These spaces are awesome. I think they're really taking off on Twitter. I saw these just totally insane spaces yesterday of what is it? Should white people even exist or something? Then it was should black people even exist? And it was like 5,000 lists. This thing is going crazy. It's kind of like the Wild West, actually, of Twitter 5 years ago. Pretty interesting. I guess they'll shut it down pretty soon. All right, gents Clubhouse? And ladies.
Oh, sorry. I just want to. Do you know Clubhouse?
Yeah, I do know Clubhouse.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I like Spaces more because I have a Twitter following, and so it's just better. There's less friction, but yeah, Clubhouse definitely invented this thing. But I get this feeling that Spaces are going to just take off and become like the Wild West, and then they're going to shut them down because there's just so much honesty and maybe even a little bit of craziness too, but we shall see.
Yeah. Anyways.
All right, guys. Hopefully I'll get better soon, and I'll talk to you all soon. All right. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Hello, we can hear you.
Yes. All right. So I took a few notes on what SpenPie said. And hold on. One thing as an aside, I felt like all the speakers, they stayed on topic. We really didn't veer off topic. It stayed on COVID, polarization, symbolism. I didn't know the term he used, but it's COVID became symbols. I felt like he wanted to. Hold on, I'm getting off topic. But yeah, I took a few notes on what he said. He said that people are using hygiene metaphors when they discuss the both sides of the spectrum. Are using hygiene metaphors, when you take the vax, you're getting injected with Satan's sperm, or you're getting injected with this elite potion, and so they're using hygiene metaphors. That the big difference is about a psychological split. It's also between whites. I wanted to challenge him on that and be well, hey, isn't it more of a class signifier though? They're signaling class affiliation. If you're pro-vax, pro-masking, it's you're aligned with the more well-heeled, more elite types. Not necessarily money though, because not it's not income level, because a plumber
is making more than a barista that has like a philosophy master's degree, but it just signals affiliation. Okay. Yeah. So I wanted him to talk more about class and then the polarization within whites. And I wanted him to be like, because he said it was psychological, and I wanted to challenge him on that. Do you guys know what I'm talking about, or am I sounding crazy?
No, I sort of get what you. The only thing we got off topic was when we sort of talked about Rittenhouse, because we have all like heard this sort of like leaked audio files where he sort of like says like, what did he say, like that he Rittenhouse is sort of like a fat scum, Latino scum, and. So I think it was interesting that he was also very like quiet during that part, and so Will and I had to like trash Rittenhouse defenders basically.
Yeah, we had to do it by ourselves, and I wasn't trashing them. I was just saying, because there was this one chud on there, and he's like, yeah, the lying. Everybody knows the media lies because everybody saw the Rittenhouse trial, and everyone agrees. And I'm like, bro, that's not true. Not everybody agrees on the Rittenhouse verdict, because like you're totally ensconced in an echo chamber. Like I'm serious. Like there's definitely like people that would disagree with the Rittenhouse verdict, and even if they're white too. Like that a lot of people don't even vote in this country. A lot of people are politically alienated. Like so, like we don't. Yeah, I don't know if we have I don't know if we have an accurate gauge on people's opinions on that. But yeah, that was the one diversion that we went on. I felt like it stayed on topic, which was cool. It shows that Richard's audience is more on point. We don't veer off into tangents. So that was pretty cool that we stayed on topic the whole time, basically, right? Even though Richard wanted to discuss the hygiene metaphors more, but we kind of didn't pick up on it.
He talked about. There was like one thing that I should have like written it down and like said it at the end, but there is this thing. I mean, I have like tweeted about this before, but I mean, if hand washing was if people like started with washing their hands today, like half the population would like ignore it for some stupid like individualist reasons about you can tell me what to do. It's the globalist mind control who wants to have control over your personal life. That's why they makes you wash your hand. I will never like wash my hand even when I have to. And we have like talked about this before, like how COVID is about. It has become like really like polarizing, and it divides like people into like two camps, and which is like really stupid. I mean, because you can't like have a society, I mean, which you have I don't know, where like half the population never follows any like
just they're like going direction brain, and this is totally astroturf. I said that phrase like 6 times. I'm sure you're all sick of it. But I was like, oh, it's astroturf. They're fake. It's the polarization is being upheld by one side. But okay, so this sounds off topic, but it's not. But you go to like populist countries like Syria, where like Assad can get 80% of the vote. Like, why do we have to have like half the country hates the other half? And it's like a whole race, like the dominant ethnic group is like split down the middle, and then you have like auxiliary minorities favoring one side over the other. Like that's not fucking. That's not optimal. Like that's so stupid. It's astroturf.
I mean, even when you go back to like the 1844 election in this country, you still look at like the statewide voting totals, like 51% one candidate, 49% the other way. No, it was always the other way, like split right down in the middle, like almost like perfectly right down the middle. You had this small section of like centrists who swing back and forth. Spencer pointed out, you said these huge swings go back and forth in the 20th century, but I think that's more of an advent of the 20th century, and we're kind of just returning back to how Americans would normally vote than this being a brand new novel thing. We already saw this happen before. We already saw this happen in the 19th century. Like, it really just go back to the 19th century where you can very easily predict how a state's going to vote. Whereas, like, everyone in, like, 1888 knew exactly how most states were going to vote, and they're like, fighting over, like, it was, like, New York, Indiana. That was, like, the only two states that would fight over. And we're really going back to, like, a system like that, which which used to have for a very long time. Then, what Spencer was talking about, like the 1972 election, we had these massive swings going back and forth.
Okay, that's actually, Pat, that's actually a really, really interesting point. I had connection issues a little bit, but like that would have been great to hear Spencer address that, how the electoral map, it functions more like the 19th century map than the 20th century one. I would have loved that, because one thing I wanted to challenge him on was about how I think, and it's got to be true, that this polarization that's like dividing whites between like anti-vaxxer wackos and then libtards. I feel like it is ultimately about race. I know, because it was his space, so I don't get to like get on my soapbox and say what I'm saying, but I feel like it's like you've got elite signifiers. They're signaling against this, this boogeyman type figure of like a white guy in a Trump hat, and he's, politically incorrect. And then you've got, the more elite aligned. And this isn't about, it's not class. It's like, because like I said, like you've got baristas making like $6 an hour, and then you've got, electricians and plumbers that are like raking it in. But clearly one is like considered anti-establishment, and then the other is more pro-establishment, elite Democrat. But I feel like it's just like this intra-racial war between whites, and it's like I feel like that race is the most important.
Well,
yeah, and you also have this. What was I going to say? Yeah, and it is sort of. There is sort of this. There are like obvious racial undertones to all this stuff. I mean, as you said, like when you like talk to him, like Democrat is sort of like a euphemism almost for an ethnic person, and I think that's like 100% correct. When Republicans, like they are like party of the working class white people. I mean, they don't really have an ethnic diversity. The only thing they have is sort of Senor Kelly Rittenhouse and token black people. I mean, they don't have any organic support outside that. I mean, the only place where they have sort of like organic ethnic support, it is people who want to be part of the white middle class. I mean, so you can have Indians or something who are aspirational, who wants to be part of wants to like LARP as white people. They LARP as white middle class people, like they become Republicans.
Yeah, and then also put this in perspective. I need to pull up the numbers, but hold on. But how many people don't vote? Or like what portion of the white population doesn't vote and is kind of alienated from the politics? It's
I believe it's about like 35%.
Okay, well that's smaller than I thought, but that still matters, right? Like, why don't those people vote? And cut it by age group too. Like, what portion of like 20-something white people don't vote? It would be enough. Like if like this was a really representative democracy, like you could have like margins like they have in Syria of like 80 to 20. I don't know. I'm going kind of off topic. I'm a little. I don't know. I know I have my favorite pet topics, but it's underrated. Like this, because I kept saying I wanted Spencer to talk about this. How it's one side. It's the rightoids, the contards that are maintaining polarization. Because like the Democrats, like, yeah, they're annoying. We trash the libtards all the time, and Western libtards are fucking awful. But like, at least they believe in collective action. At least they believe in like expert opinion. They believe in authority. They believe in government power, state power. So it's like one side is just like completely unhinged.
Yes, and it is very much the party of the grown-ups. I mean, you have you have this sort of anti-vaxxers who are very like they are completely individualistic and they don't follow anyone's rules, and they are, as I said, they are like the party of resentment, where they just sit and complain, yeah, that everything is 1984 and stuff like that. And then you have like the party of the grown-ups. I mean the Democrats, like, they really like know how to. I mean, you saw this during like the Trump presidency too. I mean, Trump acted as if he wasn't the president while he was president. It was like very bizarre. And you have Q thing too, where he is. I mean, he's simultaneously a god who's like the only good person who's fighting the deep state. And at the same time as he is that, he's also completely powerless. And Jared Kushner, or the globalist in his administration, like, they control every decision. And
Yeah.
I mean, the Republicans, they are not a party. They are not a serious party.
Yeah. Well, okay. So yeah, we keep talking about Trump, and that's like, it's very telling because you have this like schizophrenic political divide in America, where the Republicans, they have like a populist energy, but they're total oligarchs, cucks. Like, they will kiss the shoes of the oligarchs. They're total bootlickers. But like, in like in another country, like, if you had that populist energy, you would be against the bankers, the big corporations, the natural resource cartels.
These rural Americans have a very high opinion of themselves. So they believe that, like, almost like an Atlas Shrugged. That's ultimately what their philosophy is. They don't see the light in like protecting themselves, so using the government. They see the government as the cause of why they're poor, or why their life is shitty. So
okay, well, so in this space, Spencer said that there was a light switch brain effect that went on, where the rightoids became like reflexively anti-vax, anti-mask, anti-mandate. But you're saying that, or you're attributing their posture to something deeper, like
that's actually what I'm trying to contribute to. They think that whole mask thing is what's keeping, like, it's just for like the weak libs and stuff like that. Even though that they disproportionately die of COVID because they're also disproportionately obese and unhealthy, but that's only what they're attributing to, because they really like, the soul of their ultimate soul is like Atlas Shrugged. That's ultimately what it is. This highly individualist.
But I also think that he made an interesting comparison with the hijab. He used like the word hijab even, and I don't really think medical equipment, they should not be viewed as something like those. In Britain they wear those poppy flowers, paper pop flowers, when they have some World War One Memorial Week or something. Also, like, medical equipment should not be viewed in the same fashion, but it is, and that is like really unfortunate. And I don't really know. It is like really sad that this thing is all like politicized to a high degree. And,
okay. Yeah, and it's being politicized in other countries too, along a similar dynamic as in America. Like, you've got like the MAGA adjacent people in other countries are adopting a lot of these same Fox News talking points. Is that right? I think Spencer.
There is like this German guy on Twitter. He's like an ethnic German, and he's like spreading like total COVID information. And he apparently has moved to Sweden because the so-called oppression in Germany is too big for him. And all he does all day is talk about the COVID 1984 and stuff like that. I think his name is something Henrik
Jesus.
Rosenbusch or something
Jesus
like that.
Christ, that's awful.
Yeah, and this is not like anything German or European. Like he has like imported the ideology completely from the United States, and
but
like
like
really awful.
I mean it's having an impact though. Like you can see this phenomenon spreading to other countries, and so when I was trying to challenge Richard and say like, well, in the background, it's not a psychological conflict, because that almost sounded like an HBD talking point, like something that Professor Dutton would say. It was like, oh well, they just have different shaped brains. But my point was that, so despite this phenomenon spreading to other Western countries, I think it's because they're keyed into American politics, or at least on the fringes of it, whatever filters across the Atlantic. And I feel like it doesn't, just because in Austria you still have this like left right COVIDiot and then vaxxer dynamic. It doesn't disprove the thesis that it's like this pseudo racial anxiety that's causing it.
Well, my thesis on that was that ultimately what's happening is that like the liberalism that like won in World War World War II is ultimately dissolving, and that it really can't really adapt to the modern world no more. So you're having like two paths, where one, the Democrats having this very pragmatistic view towards the world, which ultimately they're deconstructing it, but very slowly. And then you have the Republicans, who are the reactionaries, who realize what the Democrats are doing, and they're coming out strongly against it, like freaking out. Like you see them have these meltdowns, because they ultimately know that they're just destroying this liberalism that they prize so much. That's all. That's what I was trying to. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't see that at first. Then that's actually really interesting. That maybe the rightoids are they're dismayed at this demolishing of the liberal world order, even though that Democrats are trying to maintain it. They see the Democrats as being accomplices in the COVID response destruction of liberalism. So they're fighting to maintain it. Is that what you meant, Pat?
Yeah, no, that's what I meant. I mean, the super liberalism hangs over top. That's kind of like capitalist, kind of, but is willing to make compromises. And this the super liberalism, it's really just failing now.
Okay, well,
I mean, Perseus has joined us. What did you take away from sort of like the latest Richard Spencer space?
I didn't watch the whole thing, but I was watching the part where are we talking about the one that Mick held, the NJP guy held last night, about the Ask a White Nationalist Anything?
I mean,
no,
we could talk about that too, but Richard just held it. I mean, we could talk about that too, because that was like super cringe, and I do have a lot to say. Yeah, but like, no, Perseus, we're talking about. Richard just held a space for like 2 hours. It was about I forget the phraseology he used, but it was like the COVID symbolism, and polarization. So two things: polarization, and then how people use COVID and they adopt symbols from it, like say masks, vaccines, anti-vax, pro-vax, essential oils, and weird cures, or like supplements, like Joe Rogan, like how it's becoming like they're becoming like tribal identifiers.
Yeah, it's kind of weird too, because there was a time when, at least I remember growing up in the 90s, not everything was so quickly political and polarized. Like, something would happen in the news and everyone would understand, like, okay, my politics is separate from, my sense of being in this society and in this country. And so it is kind of weird now, having been like fully aware for many years, how quickly everything becomes so political and obviously inevitably becomes so polarized. And with COVID, it's just so bizarre because I mean, if you recall, there were so many other public health crises even before this. Like there was a swine flu, MRSA. It's not the first time that we were made aware. In fact, I remember I had to get a hepatitis A vaccine. The homeless were, there's just so many homeless passing around this virus that, they told everyone go get the Hep A vaccine, and it was just something you did. So it's just so bizarre that a public health thing became so political and
Yeah.
polarized.
No, yeah, that's true. Yeah, we that was like the big theme of the topic. The big theme of the space was this hyper politicization, this hyper polarization, ultra partisanship, and how it is like this new phenomenon. But Richard actually had this interesting prediction. He predicted that the masks would be here to stay, and that they would become elite. They would become something ubiquitous in like bougie, elite, fancy places. Because yeah, that was just interesting prediction he made. Because Spencer has some. His predictions are worth paying attention to, because he's like he's right when other people are wrong. But he said like. So like this would be here to stay, just because it becomes like a social signifier, and he attributed it to psychological differences between people, and I wanted to challenge him on that, but that's neither here nor there. And it's like, I don't know, what do you think of that? Just all these tribal identifiers about the COVID response.
I mean, Richard's predictions are always pretty interesting. I don't know if they're always right or wrong, but they're definitely worth listening to because he does provide a perspective you wouldn't think of. But in terms of the mask becoming like a bourgeois status signal, I'm not sure. I think you're mostly going to actually see middle class people wearing it, whereas you have the working class who tend to be just for whatever reason Republican oriented for amongst whites, and then with the elite class, they have such a sense of narcissism and entitlement that they don't really restrict themselves to a party other than to not be racist or what have you, although they are like super liberal.
Yeah, they definitely are.
But just my point being is, I think if the mask stays amongst any group of people, it's probably mostly going to be middle class families because they don't have, they can't take the risk of getting COVID or letting their kids get COVID. And especially with like a lot of kids going back to school and the schools requiring masks, I think people who can afford to get their children out of schools are going to. And so I don't think in the end it's going to be a form of status signal. I think I would rather see it as something more of like a class symbol where, you're going to have people on the lower end who just object to authority. You have people on the upper end who see themselves above the law. And then you have the middle who are going to be most people are just trying to survive and, follow the rules because they're good people. So in the end, I don't think it's going to be something like the pink pussy hat that, after Trump was elected. Like, that is a legit political symbol. If you see someone wearing that, they don't have to, there's no requirement to do that. But with the mask, I would see it, and ultimately something more associated to class than a political ideology. Although because most people might not even be Democrat and might not even support vaccines, but will still wear the mask because they're around elderly people or their job requires it. So I just think it's mostly in the end going to be middle class, working class people who follow the rules who are going to be wearing it.
Okay. Wait, go for it.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of accurate. I think it's almost when it is similar to when people understood that people started washing their hands before in like 19th century or something. and it is, and the people like adopt it first. It is, I mean, it is people who are basically good rule followers, and so it's sort of like middle class people, I think.
Okay, well, hold on. There's been like this schizophrenic break in American politics recently. Over the past 30 years. And I wanted Spencer to say that it had to do with race on like the subtext because of like changing demographics, but he kept maintaining that it's like a psychological difference. But it's basically that so the schizophrenic break is that normally like populists and communist types they wouldn't be rule followers, but then you have like the more technocratic people, which normally in other countries would be like more left aligned, and left would be populist. Like they're now the rule followers. So now they're wearing masks, washing their hands. They're doing all the virtue signaling of COVID mitigation. So it's like there's this break. Like usually it would be like the technocratic people and the populist people. They would be like on the same page, and it is this very bizarre break that's we're observing in the American political landscape. And I wanted him to say like, oh, it's race is at the bottom of it, even though it's like the split between the white population. Like it looks like that the white population is like very evenly divided about it, but we didn't get to talk about that because I guess it wasn't where the conversation was going.
Yeah, the racial breakup of who's wearing masks, who's following COVID is kind of interesting because, like, yeah, I could see how most white people are broken up by it, but I think most people who are following the COVID protocols are probably just white and Asians, for that matter. But everyone else, I mean, even if blacks understand that they're Democrats or have to vote for what have you, to like Joe Biden said, you ain't black unless you vote for me. Even if they have that sense of mentality, they're not going to be the type that are going to take like too many measures to protect the rest of their community or what have you. And so it is kind of interesting how I would think that if you break the who follows the COVID protocols by race, I think you would probably see more higher IQ whites and Asians who are actually doing it, as opposed to like. And I'm not saying all people who oppose COVID protocols, especially white, are like stupid or something, but I do think that there is maybe this is what Spencer was meant by psychological, but I could see how there could be an intelligence difference in the sense that certain people are willing to put others, and those around them, and ultimately themselves, safety as of utmost prominence and importance over whatever they themselves want to do or have the freedom or liberty or individualism to do or whatever it is that the objectors state. But I think that is a type of intelligence. It's an emotional intelligence. It's a social intelligence. It's even familial. I mean, think about people who've like killed elderly members of their family because they refused to wear a mask and they were carrying COVID. Like that person should feel bad, and if they don't feel bad, then they lack empathy, and that's stupid.
Yeah, no, agreed. But I keep attributing this to recent polarization. But Pat has his hypothesis is that it's a lot deeper in American history. This libertarian individualist type streak of combining libertarianism with populism. Even though libertarianism it serves the wealthy more than it does the populace, the vox populi. But Pat thinks that it comes, it has very deep roots. Do you want to red pill him?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that getting all the way back to the days of the American Revolution, there's this populist libertarianism that it really comes from like this overinflated egos that these people have, that they're like this big, like this, this like a character from an Ayn Rand novel, where the only reason why they're being kept down is because they have to pay for like the government, and like the government keeps them down and lifts up all these people who shouldn't be lifted up. So it always had, and that's really what is about the COVID precautions. They feel like that they're just this great person who should be kept down with these stupid regulations, and that the people who are being protected by them don't really deserve that protection, and that they're oppressing them or whatever hell it is.
And I think there's sort of like an interesting thing with this sort of the restrictions, because you can't really live in a society. I mean, if everyone like acted like the sort of people who hate masks and want to vaccinate, society wouldn't like function. The only reason they can act like this and act so selfishly is because civilization is like already in place. It's like impossible if you would like go back 200 years to an agrarian society, or even more so with a sort of like hunter-gatherer society. If you had like individuals who said like, no, you can't tell me what to do. I am born free, and my rights are inalienable, and stuff like that. So it is this sort of like extreme individualism, prosperity disease almost. I mean, the only reason people can behave like this sort of antisocial is because I mean, even if these people are poor in an American context, I mean, they can't, they wouldn't be able to act like this if they were really poor in a historical sense, or disenfranchised in a historical sense. I mean, you have to like listen to people smarter than you, otherwise you're an idiot. Like so.
Mm-hmm. No, I think Pat is absolutely right that libertarianism is deeply ingrained in America. It's more than political. I think it was Milo Yiannopoulos who once coined the phrase cultural libertarianism. I think it was supposed to be like his counter to cultural Marxism when that meme was popular several years ago. But I think there is something to that. I mean, America definitely is culturally libertarian. I mean, aside from the laws and the politics, I think just looking back at some of the historical examples Pat gave, but going back to the whole agrarian, pioneer, colonialism, even cowboys, there's something very intrinsic to that sort of like, you don't fuck with me, I don't fuck with you. Don't tread on me. That mentality, I think, has always been in America and will always be sort of the undercurrent of whatever the media or the elite are wanting or saying. And I mean, if you were to break up all of the American ideologies and parties and look at America across time, from its inception, I think the Tea Party is probably the most common and popular political ideology and regime in America. And I think it will ultimately, this whole Tea Partyism will survive, wokeism. I don't know if it's going to, be as in as big a numbers as it used to be, but sometimes now you see like how the Republicans are trying to attract African Americans and Latinos, like you can be libertarian too, sort of thing. I think that sort of stuff will keep it afloat, but yeah, it's absolutely right. I mean, I think that's what separates America from Europe is this sort of cultural libertarianism, because you don't see this ideology as prominently or as valued in anywhere in Europe, and I think it has a lot to do with America's history. America was founded by, I liked, I don't know who said this phrase, but I've always liked it. But like the founding fathers were just racist libertarians. I think there's something to that. America was founded by a bunch of corporations who got together to, essentially create like residential developments in America because England wasn't as interested in it at the time. It was the other European countries were more interested in it. So you had a band of corporations who got together and started developing residential areas across the Atlantic. And so I think when you consider that sort of inception, that beginning, that origin, it's hard not to see how America would be libertarian or how it would even end up today in this sort of like super corporatized, pro-corporate, pro-business state, because it's always been. It was founded by corporations.
All right. Well, that is unfortunate, in my opinion. That might be the case, but there's this very strange contradiction where populist politics in America is libertarian. Like the only times you see like populists like acting up, like you see at these like there's like mandates at restaurants like where you have to show your proof of vaccination, and then you see like Black Lives Matter people, and you see like the MAGA flags and the Don't Tread on Me flags, like they like come together to protest it. And so it's like it's from this libertarian position that they're objecting to these mandates, but that's like the only populist energy that can be activated in America, which is very strange because populism usually in another country would correlate with being like anti-bank, anti-finance, anti-corporate, anti-capitalist. But here it's like the populist energy, it can only synchronize with like pro corporate politicians. Like none of this.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that it really comes from like Americans have much higher opinion of themselves than Europeans do. And it really comes from the fact that Americans never really faced any mass devastation on a grand scale. I mean, they never were like in Germany during the 30 Years' War, where like half the population died. So they never really felt, what could happen if you don't have, some kind of power structure working, for you. So they feel like it's unnecessary and just keeping them down. And I think that the only way these people can ever really wake up out of this is if some massive calamity happens in this country. I mean, Americans have always, whenever a problem has occurred, only once, only during the Great Depression, have they ever actually said, okay, let's have the government do something, after they tried the other option during the Hoover administration, which was to do nothing and to lower taxes and all this other shit. And it failed. So I do think that recovery is possible, but you really need to get punched in the nose or kicked in the teeth really badly for that to happen.
Yes, I agree. I don't want to wish ill on my country. I don't want there to be a catastrophe. But if you look at America, has like a really charmed history. We haven't had a huge catastrophe, put on us. From like the outside or something we couldn't control. So that like our national psyche is just like, and of course America projects power. We have this huge military. We have this huge intelligence apparatus. So we're projecting power. We're using like collective muscle to like do stuff, but we've never actually had our nose bloodied, and that's. Other countries have. Other countries know the risk of playing geopolitics, and Americans have not felt that. And we've gone on like a long time. Like I like to say that America is the oldest country in the world because what is it? We've had a presidential election every 4 years since the 1700s. Like that kind of uninterrupted functioning of government. That's way unprecedented. So it's like we don't have this experience with calamity, with chaos, with just like uncontrolled suffering. So I don't know. I don't want us to suffer, but like the only way we could change is if that happened. Maybe.
I'm actually really skeptical about the notion that if some sort of historical level cataclysm occurs, that there will be this sort of grand changing of social consciousness. I've always been really skeptical of that, and one of the main reasons was because I remember how 9/11 sort of played out. I think 9/11 is the closest thing in my life that sort of was, sort of like that cataclysm. Maybe Hurricane Katrina is up there. I'm not sure, but 9/11, I think, really just that. A lot of people say that was our generation's Pearl Harbor or what have you, or JFK assassination. And the thing I remember most is after 9/11, there was a greater social consciousness, but it changed in the direction of Zionism and the military-industrial complex, and it wasn't in the way that maybe we would hope so. Like maybe someone bloodies your nose and you realize that you've been too aggressive or you've been making the wrong moves. Maybe I need to change how I approach others. That didn't really happen. If anything, it was like America went into like retard strength mode where guy gets punched in the nose and he starts taking out like 10 other people around him, So I don't know what kind of event it would have to be that would even change people's mindset to be less individualistic, to be more socialist or tribalist or even racialist. I don't know if it'll be a cataclysmic event that'll change everything. That's on TVs everywhere, every channel, the internet, and everything. I think if anything is going to change mass social consciousness, it's going to be a very slow grind. It will be a slow, like Bill O'Reilly used to say, it's a cultural war that begins, I would say, largely in the schools. And so it would be a generational process that I don't think I think a cataclysm would just set it back even more at this point.
Yeah, and I think there is sort of like genetic explanations for. I've heard this explanation that there is like genetic reasons for why Americans are so individualistic. Because what was I going to say? I mean, because the people who emigrated to America, they like emigrated voluntary, and I mean, it wasn't like, I mean, with the exception of the sort of like African slaves. I mean, because they obviously didn't emigrate voluntarily. I mean, you have these people who, I mean, who are more. I mean, they are like attracted to a libertarian ideology because these were like people who left behind their village and their cities, which they have lived in several hundred years, and to more or less like start a new life because of some disagreements over religion. And I mean, you have like a lot of Huguenots and minor Protestant sects which founded America, and I think they are like very receptive to this libertarian ideology. I mean, because of that history. I mean, I think Americans would be much less individualistic if the emigration to the New World was involuntary, that they have like take prisoners or something like that. So I think that is a big part of it. I mean, in every society, you would have people who were more individualist and people who were less individualist, and America selected people who were more individualist, and even like later when you had like later during the 19th century immigration, you had the pioneers, you had like German laborers who like left behind cities they have like lived in for several hundred years to more or less to emigrate for personal reasons, to make more money, or because and they leave behind all their family. So I think that is a big reason. Yes, Will.
Oh, wait, okay, yeah. I want to push back on this. I don't think we're like a different breed, because there's always going to be regression to the norm. There's always a mix of personalities. That's the only way that a society can function. There's always going to be different temperaments, different alignments. I don't think we were bred to be libertarians. I think the reason that Americans have this libertarian streak is just because America was so fortunate. Like, we didn't have any catastrophe. And like I know 9/11 happened, right? And also COVID-19 happened. That was a big catastrophe. I would say it might even be bigger than 9/11. That would change people's consciousness. The reason 9/11 didn't change our consciousness is because we're not being invaded or occupied by a foreign army. Those are just like little pathetic pot shots being taken by Al Qaeda retards. And by the way, we know who's behind Al Qaeda and the Salafist Wahhabi terrorists. We know, but it's not like the country is being occupied. So it's not like we're being forced to sign unequal treaties. There's no national humiliation. So I think it's just because we had a charmed history. I don't think that we are genetically libertarian. I think it's more cultural, historical, and social.
Yeah, 100% what Will's saying.
Yeah, although Perseus said that it would change through like a slow grind of maybe it's kind of like the boiling frog analogy. Like people would just they would decide it's intolerable to have this approach. Because guess what? I talk to normies a lot. I know we're on Twitter, so we're not we're not normies, but I talk to a lot of normies, and the libertarian ideology is like really deep rooted. Even if they vote Democrat, Republican, or they don't vote at all, and even if they're of other races too, like they're non-white, like it's filtering through this libertarian ideology. And I have this sinister hypothesis that it's AstroTurf. I know I said that like 12 times, that AstroTurf, but like Ayn Rand, who the fuck is Ayn Rand? Pardon the language, but who is she? You know she's from Russia. She moved here. Do you know like what her people were? Like they weren't Russians. Like this had to be top down. So it's like it's alien, because I remember that Atlas Shrugged, right? It was published in the 50s. It did cause like outrage, even among conservatives. They're like, it's like she's irreverent towards military veterans. She denigrates like wounded soldiers from war. It's like, oh fuck them. That's their loss that they got injured, and it's like. It's psychopathic, and I have this hypothesis. It kind of cuts against the current of what everyone else is saying, but that this is recent. This libertarianism stuff, it's recent, and the only reason America was fertile ground for it is because we haven't had a catastrophe to make people prideful and like kind of butthurt because. Americans are like, yeah, we're triumphant. We win. All we do is win. America's never actually been crushed before. I don't know. That's my hypothesis. Am I crazy or what?
I think there is something to what you're saying because growing up, I remember that most of the sort of communal, social aspects of white people were mostly among church-going people back when Christianity was a lot more popular. You had a lot more local churches that people invested their time and families into. And I recall specifically that, even if you had like if they had a libertarian sentiment toward the government, they still had a more pro-social, more communal feeling toward their other church members. So there was a system of donating money or to someone who just lost their job, or having a room at the church for people who need housing immediately or what have you. I think so one of my really good friends, his father is a priest at a church near where I live, and I was actually talking to him not too long ago, and we were talking about some of these similar topics about like welfare and what have you. And something he had mentioned, and he's like an older white guy, so he has a very different generational perspective from me. But he did mention something that I thought was interesting, that he wishes that there was a welfare system in America where the money would go to the local churches who know the people who won't be using it for drugs or work or what have you, and you have a closer connection, a closer bond between who's giving the welfare to the person who needs it, as opposed to having some sort of bureaucratic agent in the government who like doesn't even know who you are and won't check on you again to make sure that money's being used well. So his whole point was that he wishes that there was a sort of like local aspect to essentially socialism, But I think the point that he's missing, or he doesn't see as well as we do, is that Christianity is dying in America, and I think with it is that sort of pro-social, pro-communal aspect, so that now people are replacing that part of their lives with various forms of freedom, whether it's like social, drug, or sexual, or business, or what have you. um, that social hole is being filled in by freedom now, in the absence of the church.
Yeah, and no, I agree with what you're saying, Perseus. That the church congregations, they used to be the nucleus of community. In fact, towns, or at least in the northern part of the U.S., or at least where culturally Yankee norms would prevail, the church or the schoolyard or the church would be the center of a town. Whenever they would lay out a town, like the surveyors would certify a new township, the church would be at the center, or a schoolyard. But well, one, I'm not a Christian, and I'm totally happy that Christianity is declining. I wish it would decline faster. But you're right. But why is Christianity declining? And that's a good thing. It's declining, but maybe it's because of the dissolving of the bonds of community. I think maybe it's not the proximate cause, the decline of religion, whether people are Lutheran, they're Episcopalian, they're Catholic, or they're Baptist, or what have you, all the different denominations. I think people stopped going to church because they lost their sense of community. That's just my suspicion, though. But either way, that's a good thing, because I don't like Christianity. It probably got us to where we are now. But I think,
and it sort of like ties into what I said earlier, that they can all like act like this sort of like antisocial element because we are so like prosperous right now. I mean, and I mean, because in the past, like, I mean, even like individualist people, they needed to be like part of a church or something. I mean, to get welfare and connections and that sort of stuff. I mean, you don't like, so so they had to be like more collectivist and had to like put their ego aside. You don't really need that anymore. Like now, everyone is isolated and individualist, and so the church has only becomes like a pastime. It is not essential to go to a church in order to get these sort of services, and because obviously in the past, like everything came. I mean, you had to know someone to get something done, and you don't need that anymore. Now you just apply on to a government office.
Oh wait, no, hold on. This is totally true. Because like I remember talking to my grandparents. They told me that back in their day, leaving your church was like leaving the universe. Like, or like even marrying somebody. Like, let's say you're a Catholic and you marry a Lutheran. That would be like leaving the world. So it was like, I don't know. It's hard. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Well, maybe not, because can we imagine what that would be like? Nobody would care if you were baptized Catholic, but you marry a Baptist these days. But like, what was that world like? Where the church was like a serious thing. And either way, screw Christianity, though. I just want to say that. I'm glad it's declining, but maybe it's declining for some other reason, though. Maybe the decline of the church is not the proximate cause. Maybe there was something deeper, and I kind of suspect it's racial, though. I mean, but I'm a racist, so I always say that.
I'm going to make one more point, and then I'm going to go to bed. But the one thing I will say is that even if you disagree with the details of Christianity, it still served the same function and foundation of any religion in terms of being a cultural center where people gathered, and you met your mate there. People create families and bonds. It's a place where money gets passed around, and it's out of the hands of the government. So I think that function, even if you don't like the details of Christianity, I think that's what most people would say they mean when they say that there's a religious void in America. Because you can debate the details all you want, but if you don't have a religion that serves the basic functions, there's going to be that gaping hole, no matter what even if you have someone coming with the right details that you like. But that's the last thing I'm going to say. But thanks a lot, gentlemen.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thanks for having.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll do this again. We'll chat more America.
Yes, it is very interesting to talk about these things. Yeah.
All right, good night.
Good night. By the way, do you people take notes when he speaks? Because I sort of take notes and think like, what am I going to
Yes.
say?
No, I do. Because I encourage everyone to take notes, but like it like activates the circuits in the brain, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that, and I remember what I was thinking, and it's good. Always take notes and have your questions ready ahead of time. Because it was super annoying when like Spencer would call on someone and they would like go on like a meandering tangent point they wanted to make that only they could understand. Because we all live inside our heads, right? Or a lot of people do. And he was like, "Yeah, ask a question instead." That's just my pet peeve. Just have a question ready. Don't like go on a meandering tangent, that only you can understand.
Yes, and that was like really good that I took down what I was going to say, because when he ended his monologue, I mean, no one wanted to speak, and he said, Bardamu, do you have any comments on this? And I was like, not really. I was thinking like, not really, but I had some written down, so I had to.
Yes.
I mean, it would have been like really awful if I just like stood there like completely silent.
No, see, he knew you had one ready. Because everyone take notes. Have your notes prepared. I'm a big advocate of studying people and listening to them. If you admire them, if they're like a figure in your life, then you have to take example from them. Study, use the weapons at your disposal, and literature is a weapon. Like, use your writing skills. I'm a big advocate of that. That's just one of my pet causes. Is you should respect a teacher. You should respect a leader, and take notes. Use all your weapons. So I hope we were all taking notes and we had questions prepared.
Yes, and I recommend people to take a physical notebook and write it down, and don't just write it down on a phone or on a computer, because it does something with the brain when you write it down like with a pen. I don't know what it is, but it feels more real for some reason.
Yeah, well, whatever means are at your disposal, use it. Because I'm a big fan of like other people that haven't been banned from YouTube yet. So I like come up with questions for them on my phone. I won't mention them by name because I don't want to fucking start another topic. But if I think of a question, I will type it into my notepads because this person's very knowledgeable. And then once I ask the question, I will write a date next to it and be like, okay, I already asked that, so I'll like put a date. It's like been completed, and then just like throughout the day, if I think of another question, I'll put it into my notes on my smartphone. But use whatever means are at your disposal. Use writing, use literacy. Always study people. Take this stuff seriously. Don't be like too cool for school. I hate that attitude of like, everything's ironic, we don't take it seriously. No, take it super serious.
Yes, we absolutely hate irony here. Perseus actually had like a great tweet the other day. I mean, we basically said, I'm paraphrasing now. In order to be successful as a king, you need to have like a mindset of a soldier, and not the mindset of a king. And that is like absolutely true. You have to I mean, you have to like take this stuff seriously and study this stuff. I mean, there is like no room for irony or this Groyper type, and people think this is a joke. I mean, this is like important stuff we're doing. I think I'm gonna end this now. So if anyone has last words, okay, I'm ending this now. Good night, everyone.
Good night.